Chapter 16:12. Yes, all elven workers, and I will try my best to get them to deploy elves with experience in weaving. Meg nodded with a smile. Meg felt that if he changed his career to become a talent agent, he would definitely become a big catfish in Chaos City's talent market in a short period of time. After all, he had close to 30,000 night elves who were ready to work in his hands. Such workers who were not expensive and had high overall quality were simply the dream of every employer. Of course, Meg couldn't bear to let such high-quality talents go out to be exploited by other capitalists. He had a few big projects in his hands that were progressing at the same time, and a huge industrial chain that encompassed the upper and lower reaches of the textile industry was being laid out. His target wasn't just Chaos City's market. Meanwhile, Gloria, Reyna, and the others were a part of the business landscape. Meg was also happy to let the night elves get employed there and push their career to another level. If it's possible, it would definitely be a qualitative leap for Suede. Gloria couldn't hide her excitement. Meg continued with a smile and said, "The textile factory I invested in has already started to deliver the goods. When you have time, you can go to the north of the city to meet the person in charge. If your current channel can support the factory's output, we can talk about cooperation. I've already sorted out Family Moraton's textile industry channels this month. I've cut off the backward and loss-making production lines, and also cut off some suppliers with poor quality and outdated designs. However, I've retained the core transportation and sales team. If the evaluation confirms that the quality of your textile factory's fabric is suitable, we will use it as the main selling point," Gloria said. Meg had mentioned this cooperation before, so after she took over Family Moraton's textile industry, she carried out drastic reforms. She removed more than half of the industrial chain that originally integrated production, transportation, and sales, and only retained the core transportation and sales team. She learned a lot from Meg. Professionals earned professional money, so they didn't have to eat up the entire industry's upper and lower reaches completely. Very good. When you have time, go to the north of the city and look for an elf called Ashley. She's now the person in charge of the factory. Meg looked at Gloria with slight admiration. It seemed like she had indeed grown a lot during this period. All right. Gloria nodded slightly. She lowered her head and picked up her teacup, avoiding Meg's gaze. She felt her cheeks heat up, as if she had been scalded by his burning gaze. Gloria didn't stay for long. She left after drinking a cup of tea. Meg took a nap under the sun. When he woke up, he opened his eyes and saw a seductive face, sexy red wavy hair, and slender phoenix eyes. His gaze moved down slightly, and her full breasts were almost right in front of him. A faint fragrance assailed his nostrils, and it was a scent that could easily make one sink into it. Meg narrowed his eyes, feeling a little familiar. When the woman saw that Meg had woken up, she took a step back and asked Meg, "Hey, are you the owner of this restaurant?" Isn't this Angela?" After the woman took a step back, Meg finally saw her face clearly. He couldn't help being slightly stunned. When they were on the Demon Islands, their restaurant's one-day employee, Miss Succubus, was Angela. After she disappeared mysteriously that day, Meg didn't expect to meet her again in Chaos City. This really surprised and dazed him. Angela looked at Meg, who was staring at her in a daze, and pursed her lips. All men were the same. They couldn't control their eyes and lower bodies when they saw her. "Yes, I'm the owner of this restaurant. The restaurant isn't open for business yet. If you want to eat, you have to wait for about an hour," Meg said calmly as he quickly retracted his gaze and glanced at his watch. He didn't have much to do with this extraordinary Miss Succubus, and he couldn't expose what happened on the Demon Islands. Hence, he didn't intend to claim this employee. It was best for them to meet peacefully like this. This fellow is actually asking me to wait. Angela looked at Meg, who retracted his gaze and ignored her, with a hint of surprise in her eyes. Furthermore, there were seats here. Why didn't he ask her to sit down and wait, and even get her a cup of warm tea when she was thirsty? Meg poured himself a cup of tea, and sipped it slowly while ignoring Angela. I say. Angela opened her mouth. Meg raised his head to look at her politely, and his eyes met the pair of long and narrow blue almond-shaped eyes. The mysterious and bewitching eyes suddenly began to spin like an endless whirlpool, trying to pull him into the abyss. What's the matter? Meg asked. You're actually not bewitched by the eyes of enchantment? Angela's expression froze. She looked at Meg, who was looking at her calmly as if she was a fool, in disbelief. Although the other party was an 8th-tier succubus, the eyes of enchantment that she released at will could easily bewitch and control men and make them kneel before her. However, his mental strength was above level 10 after all, and he had also been baptized by the Great Old Ones. In the face of this level of the eyes of enchantment, he didn't even feel dizzy. However, this lady really liked to release the eyes of enchantment on strangers. It seemed like she was someone who always wanted to prove her charm value. Could this fellow be a powerful magic caster? No, there's no magical aura on him at all. Then. Angela's face revealed a hint of understanding. Seems like he can't do it either. Her eyes of enchantment had only failed twice when it came to ordinary men. The first time was when she met that bearded crab demon boss on Carapace Island. Although he couldn't do it, he had an extremely beautiful wife and an extremely cute daughter. Then, it was this time. This man looked quite handsome, and the curves of his body hidden under his clothes were far better than ordinary men's. She didn't expect him to be unable to do it. Sigh, what a pity. Angela looked at Meg with some pity in her eyes. Meg retracted his gaze, and continued to drink his tea. This lady's brain doesn't seem to be normal either. After realizing that she was ignored again, Angela wasn't too angry. She retracted her eyes of enchantment. For a man who couldn't do it, it was a little too hurtful. She coughed softly, and said in the purest voice she could muster, "Then, can I sit here for a while?" "Have a seat. If you want to drink tea, pour it yourself," Meg said without even turning his head. Although Angela had only been an employee for half a day, he hadn't given her her salary yet. It wasn't too much to ask for a cup of tea. "Thank you." Angela poured a cup of hot tea and held it in her hands. The warmth dispelled the cold, and made her face flush. She turned to look at Meg curiously, and asked, "I heard that you can make spicy crayfish." Chapter 16:13. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly, but his tone was very calm as he replied. "You mean those super big crayfish that are numb, spacey, and spicy?" Angela continued to ask. Because the eyes of enchantment didn't work on Meg, she could only answer him verbally. Meg replied again. He glanced at Angela from the corner of his eye. Could this succubus have noticed something? After getting Meg's confirmation, Angela sighed in disappointment. She mumbled, "Sigh, although you know how to cook, it's definitely not as delicious as that guy on Carapace Island." Meg didn't reply. She wasn't talking to him anyway. "Do you know him? That man who sells crayfish on Carapace Island? The one whose wife is especially beautiful?" Angela asked Meg. "I don't know him." Meg shook his head and glanced at Angela. "Is this fellow thinking about his crayfish or his wife?" "His wife is really beautiful. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Angela sighed with some pity in her expression. "Miss, if you're hungry now, you can go ahead and take a look. There are a few good restaurants there, and the food isn't any worse than ours." Meg recommended with a smile. He regretted asking her to sit down and have tea with him. I'm not hungry. I just like your restaurant. Angela shook her head and stared into Meg's eyes. Her long and narrow phoenix eyes squinted slightly as she asked curiously, "Don't you have any feelings for me at all? Everyone else wants me to stay and look forward to something happening with me, but you want to chase me away." "I don't have any feelings." Meg shook his head honestly. He had already jumped out of the low-level desire zone. He wouldn't be moved by a strange woman's coquettishness. "It's all right. I'm quite interested in your restaurant." Angela, on the other hand, looked back at the restaurant indifferently. Through the transparent floor-to-ceiling glass, there was an exquisite restaurant that made people want to go in and have a seat. "Up to you." Meg was too lazy to argue with her. He finished the tea in his hand in one gulp and got up to tidy up the tea set. "Aren't you going to sit and drink some tea with me?" Angela asked Meg, who was carrying the tea set and putting away the recliner. "I'm going to prepare for the opening." "Sorry, I can't accompany you," Meg said without even turning his head. "Then can I go in and have a seat?" Angela stood up and asked expectantly. "No." Meg's voice did not have any room for negotiation, just like a door that was resolutely closed. "This guy." Angela looked at the closed door in front of her and raised her eyebrows. "He has quite a personality. No male had ever treated her like this before. This guy was the first, no, the second. All right. At least he left me a cup. That means he's not completely heartless," Angela mumbled with a smile as she held the ceramic cup in her hand. Two men who were passing by saw this scene, and were stunned. They only came back to their senses when they bumped into a big tree. Men. Angela glanced at the two men who were awkwardly crawling up from the ground, and pursed her lips. "My charm is still irresistible. Seems like she didn't come specially to look for me. She came because she heard about the crayfish. Since she knows that the crayfish restaurant on Carapace Island is missing, that means she should have come back to look for them, and persevered to find Chaos City." Meg put down the recliner, and fell into deep thought as he looked at Angela, who was sitting outside the door. He didn't know much about her, but surprisingly, Irina seemed to have a good impression of her. As a succubus, she actually reached the 8th tier at such a young age. Her talent and power were both very shocking. Irina seems to have interacted with her more. I'll let her decide how to deal with it. Meg quickly convinced himself, and began to prepare for the lunch service. Firis, Mia, and the rest came to the restaurant one after another. "There's a very beautiful succubus outside. Although it's because of her racial talent, it's my first time seeing such a beautiful succubus," Yabamiya said as she walked in, and was stunned. "Yes. She doesn't look very old, but she emits a seductive aura that makes one unable to look away." Reina nodded with a tinge of envy. She felt that she was filled with a man's aura, and she was like a professional chef in the kitchen instead of a kitchen maid. Isn't it just a little more meat?" Barbara snorted. She glanced at her flat airport, and suddenly felt a little discouraged. "A rare 8th-tier succubus with outstanding talent," Elizabeth commented. Everyone was excitedly discussing that beautiful and powerful succubus at the door. However, Jane came to the kitchen with surprise and worry. She looked at Meg, who was braising tofu, and softly said, "Boss, that Angela, who stayed in the shop for 2 days on Carapace Island, is right outside the door now." I saw her. I even had a cup of tea with her." Meg nodded with a smile. Jane was stunned. Before coming to Chaos City, Meg had reminded her many times not to tell anyone about what happened on Carapace Island. But now that this Angela had come to Chaos City, she might recognize them and reveal what happened on Carapace Island. Wasn't Meg worried at all? Did she see you when she came in? Meg asked Jane. She should have. Jane nodded. Because she was too shocked, she couldn't help but take a few more glances at Angela. When their gazes met, she also saw Angela's shock. In that case. Meg pondered. He managed to fool himself, but forgot about Jane. It seemed like he still had to have a deep conversation with Angela. Do we need to silence her? Jane asked softly. Not necessarily. Meg shook his head with a smile as he looked at the conflicted Jane. He thought for a while, and said, You don't have to worry about this. I will handle it. Jane nodded, and didn't ask further. Anyway, the boss and lady boss could settle everything. She didn't have to worry. Why does that lady with a little golden horn on her head look a little familiar? Angela, who had already stood up from her stool and joined the queue, looked at the door thoughtfully. After confirming with her gaze, the other party should have seen her before. Who could it be? Angela felt that the lady looked very familiar, but she couldn't be sure of her identity at that moment. Big Sister Angela, why are you in Chaos City? Right at this moment, a soft voice sounded beside her. Chapter 16:14. Angela was stunned when she heard the voice. She turned to look at the little girl who was looking at her curiously. This was a half-elf little girl with long silver hair and blue eyes. She was wearing a white shirt, and looked very chubby and cute. She felt that she shouldn't know this little girl, but it was her first day in Chaos City. How did this little girl know her name? Moreover, when she heard this voice and saw the little girl's cute appearance, a small figure still jumped into her mind unconsciously. In her memory, such a cute little girl was only the daughter of the crayfish boss on Carapace Island. Did I get the wrong person? Amy looked at Angela, who didn't respond to her, and frowned in confusion. She continued, I am little, Amy, you're back. The restaurant's door suddenly opened, and Meg walked out with a smile. He held Amy's hand and walked into the restaurant. Amy. Little Amy. Angela's eyes suddenly lit up as she looked at Amy. Although she didn't have that pair of crab pincers on her head, and her appearance had changed a little, the image of the two quickly overlapped in her mind. Her figure was the same, and her tone was the same as well. Why would the crayfish restaurant owner's daughter appear in Chaos City? Was the crayfish restaurant that turned into ruins a natural disaster or a man-made disaster? Was the family of 3 that went missing mysteriously still alive? Why did this fellow stop the little fellow from speaking? Questions popped up in Angela's mind. She stepped forward, and looked at Amy, who was about to be dragged away by Meg, and said, Little girl, blink if you're kidnapped. Kidnapped? Meg and Amy turned to look at Angela strangely at the same time. He's my father, Amy said with a smile. Miss, slander is illegal in Chaos City, Meg said, pretending to be serious. Although I also feel that Mr. Max shouldn't have such a cute daughter like Little Boss, isn't it too much to say that she's kidnapped? Is this the restaurant's new pre-meal performance? Could this beautiful succubus be the restaurant's new employee? The guests also roared with laughter. Did I make a mistake? Angela frowned as she listened to everyone's words. Let's go. It's time to eat. Meg held Amy's hand with a resigned expression as they made their way into the restaurant. He had been thinking about everything, but he had completely forgotten about Amy. However, he couldn't blame her. Even he hadn't thought that he would meet Angela in Chaos City. Goodbye, big sister Angela, Amy waved at Angela enthusiastically before following Amy into the house. My intuition tells me that they are the same person, but why are there so many things that don't match? If this little girl was Xiao Ai, then why did she call the owner of this restaurant father? What does the lobster restaurant thousands of miles away have to do with this restaurant? Angela looked at the slowly closing door of the restaurant, her mind full of doubts. She felt that she was infinitely close to the truth, but she couldn't figure it out at all. "Father, don't you recognize her? Isn't she the big sister who worked in the restaurant when we were selling crayfish on Carapace Island?" Amy asked as she followed Meg into the house. I know it's her." Meg nodded. This little fellow's memory wasn't any worse than his, so he didn't try to fool her. Furthermore, after Amy's reminder, Angela had already guessed their identities as long as she wasn't stupid. Then, is she going to continue being an employee at the restaurant? Amy continued to ask. Meg pondered seriously for a while. "I'm not too sure, but this is indeed a good suggestion. As the saying went, fortune comes from danger." Instead of silencing her for no reason, he might as well arrange for her to stay by his side and find a way to make sure she understood everything. Then, he wouldn't have to worry about her causing any trouble. "Look, isn't Camilla quite obedient now?" Irina came back for lunch. The moment she entered, she looked at Meg and said, "An acquaintance is here." "Yes." Meg nodded. "How do you plan to deal with her?" Irina looked at Meg with a faint smile. "You were the one who recruited this employee, so you have the final say on how to deal with her." Meg took the opportunity to push the blame back. He tried his best not to complicate the matter and maintain his purity. "I think she's quite interesting. If she's willing to work in the restaurant, why don't we let her stay?" Irina said with a smile. Meg glanced at Irina and became more vigilant. Angela had shown an unusual interest in Irina, and now it seemed that Irina also had a good impression of her. This wasn't a very good sign. "Is there a problem?" "No, I'm also a little worried that she'll talk nonsense about what happened on Carapace Island. Perhaps it's a good choice to keep her." Meg shook his head. She was just a succubus, and he was very confident in his charm. After deciding on a solution, how to make Angela willing to join Mamie's became a problem worth thinking about. Roasted pig's eyes. This violent dish name really doesn't fit Mr. Mac's naming style at all. Just hearing the name of the dish gives me goosebumps. Don't tell me Mr. Mac is really going to dig out the pig's eyes and roast them. Hee hee. I'm already starting to get excited. Outside the restaurant, the customers were discussing the notice hanging on the door. The main reason was that the impact of the dish name was too strong, and it was hard for them to ignore it. They couldn't help but look forward to it, but it would be a lie to say that they weren't looking forward to it at all. He won't even let the pig's eyes go. I didn't expect this boss to have such a perverted side behind his gentle appearance. Angela also noticed the meaning of the notice on the little blackboard, and couldn't help but purse her lips. She came to Chaos City this time to find a suitable place for her sisters to live. Although the remote island was quiet and undisturbed, it was really a little lonely. During this period of time, there were sisters forming teams to escape every few days. She actually felt like she was imprisoning them. Hence, she chose to come to Chaos City, and planned to inspect this neutral city known as the City of Freedom. She wanted to see if the succubi living here were really respected from the bottom of their hearts before deciding if she should move her base to Chaos City. She made a trip to Carapace Island on her way here. The original crayfish restaurant had already become a wasteland. There were still a few crayfish restaurants left on the island, but their business was rather prosperous. It was said that they were opened by the disciples of the original crayfish restaurant owner, and had already become a famous delicacy. After she came to Chaos City, she heard that this Mamie's was also selling crayfish, so she came here on a whim. I want to see if the crayfish in Chaos City is as delicious as those on Carapace Island, Angela mumbled to herself softly. Chapter 16:15. The restaurant opened for business, and the customers entered the restaurant one after another. Angela chose a seat in the corner, and flipped open the menu on the table. The menu was rather rich, and all of them were dishes she had never heard of before. Red braised pork, beggar's chicken, steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers. They all looked like strange dishes, and made her confused. So many dishes. That boss doesn't seem to know how to cook so many dishes. Angela mumbled. Her eyes lit up when she saw the crayfish, but she frowned again when she saw the price. This boss is so black-hearted. He actually sells a crayfish for 1,000 copper coins. It's 10 times more expensive than Carapace Island. She reached out to touch her pocket, and hesitated for a while. She looked up at Yabamiya, who had been standing at the side for a while, and said, I want a spicy crayfish. All right, give me a moment. Yabamiya nodded with a smile, and walked to the next customer. The waitresses in this restaurant are all so beautiful. There are half-dragons, magic casters, elves, and so on. Angela looked around curiously, and her gaze quickly landed on Jane again. She paused at the golden horn on her forehead for a while, and said firmly in her heart, it's her. The one and only golden horn, the waitress at the crayfish restaurant on Carapace Island. The half-elf girl who seems to be the same waitress, Anne. Boss Kant, who also didn't react to the eyes of Succubus. Angela's eyes became brighter and brighter, and the answer seemed to be coming out. But, where's the lady boss? Angela looked around, trying to find that beautiful figure. Angela was very disappointed that she couldn't find the lady boss. This made her doubt her own judgment again. This doesn't make sense. He wouldn't have lost such a beautiful wife, would he? Angela mumbled with a frown as she stretched her neck to look at Meg, who was busy behind the glass display window. Harrison, who was sitting opposite her, tidied his clothes, and asked a little uneasily, Miss, is there something wrong with my bearing? He had mustered all his courage to sit opposite this beautiful and seductive succubus lady. However, she seemed to be sizing him up from just now. Those seductive eyes and face made his heart beat faster, and he finally couldn't help but ask. Angela's gaze finally landed on Harrison, and she raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't like eating at the same table with strangers, but she had already noticed that this restaurant seemed to have a tradition of sharing tables. Since elves could tolerate sitting at the same table with demons, she couldn't say anything. However, the human in front of her was too fat. He was about 3 times her size. Although his eyes were squinted, she didn't feel offended because they were squinted by his fat. I'm not looking at you, Angela said honestly. I'm sorry. Harrison's face reddened. He felt that he had embarrassed himself to the core. How could he have asked such a question? It's okay. Maybe it's because you're too big, so you feel like everyone is looking at you. Angela shook her head and didn't take it to heart. Why, do I feel a sudden pain in my heart? Harrison clutched his chest in discomfort. Angela also realized that her words were a little hurtful. She tried to explain, I didn't mean that. I just feel that you're blocking my view. Harrison felt himself becoming smaller and smaller. He slowly curled up into a ball on the chair, and asked meekly, is this okay? Yes, it's pretty good. Angela glanced in the direction of the kitchen. Now, she didn't have to stretch her neck. She nodded with satisfaction. I didn't expect there to be such a special succubus. Harrison sighed in his heart. It was said that succubi had a talent for seducing people, and they were very good at using this. However, this succubus in front of him seemed to be a little different. Are you a regular of the restaurant? Angela suddenly asked Harrison. Yes, I should be one of the earliest regulars of Mamie's. I became a regular not long after the restaurant opened. I've seen it go from a restaurant with very few customers to a famous and popular restaurant in the city where you have to line up for a long time just to eat a meal. Harrison nodded. There was a hint of pride in his tone, as if he was also a witness and participant in this great cause. Oh. Angela's eyes lit up a little, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She revealed a charming smile, and said, "Then, when did this restaurant open?" Harrison's heartstrings were tugged by Angela's smile. He quickly answered, "It should be close to half a year ago. It opened in early autumn. It's already late winter now." Half a year. Angela frowned when she heard that. If that was the case, it didn't match the timeline of that lobster restaurant on Carapace Island. Could it be that there was a problem with her previous deduction? Yes, Mr. Mac is also a good wine that doesn't need to be afraid of the dark alley. Previously, this area was almost deserted. There were only a few blacksmiths and funeral shops. Then, this restaurant appeared out of nowhere. However, as the restaurant launched more and more delicacies, its reputation rose day by day. It revitalized all the shops in this area, and became what it is now, Harrison lamented. Is that half-elf girl really the boss's daughter? Angela continued to ask. Harrison nodded, and said, "Of course the little boss is Mr. Mac's daughter. This is something that everyone knows. Don't be fooled by her young age. She's a very powerful magic caster, and even has the Lord of Ice and the Lord of Fire as her masters. She's a little genius magic caster in Chaos City." Is that so? Angela didn't expect that little girl to have such a powerful background. She hesitated for a while, and continued to ask, "Then, what about his wife? What about the lady boss of the restaurant? Mr. Mac's wife?" Harrison looked at Angela, and suddenly wanted to hug his chubby self. Indeed, the reason why the goddess took the initiative to talk to him was not because she wanted to know more about him, but because she liked the handsome Mr. Mac, who could cook. Mr. Mac doesn't have a wife. He's one of the few golden bachelors in Chaos City. The girls who want to marry him can line up from Mamie's to the city gate. However, he hasn't had any scandals for such a long time. He's very chaste, Harrison said. No wife. Angela fell into deep thought again. Although she didn't use the eyes of enchantment, she was sure that this chubby man wasn't lying to her. However, the information she got from him was completely different from her previous deductions and judgments. This made her a little confused. "Hello, here's your spicy crayfish." Just then, Yebamia placed a plate of spicy crayfish in front of Angela. This. That's it. Angela's eyes widened, and she almost jumped out of her chair. No pop-up window. Chapter 16:16. Angela looked at the crayfish lying quietly on the plate. The bright red crayfish was even bigger than her face. It was cut open from the head to the tail, revealing the plump meat inside. It looked exactly the same as the spicy crayfish from IE Crayfish Restaurant. The appearance is the same. The fragrance is the same too. This spicy crayfish is the taste of IE Crayfish Restaurant. Angela was a little agitated. Her deduction was right. This restaurant was definitely related to IE Crayfish Restaurant. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a similar taste. She had tried all the crayfish restaurants on Carapace Island, and none of them could replicate it to such an extent. They didn't even deserve to be called spicy crayfish. Mr. Mac's spicy crayfish is the best. Although this flavor was introduced later, it's not inferior to the braised crayfish at all. It's a top delicacy that goes well with wine. Harrison couldn't help but interrupt when he saw Angela's agitated expression. "I know," Angela answered casually. Angela replied casually. She couldn't wait to taste the spicy crayfish herself and see if it was really the same as IE Crayfish Restaurants. If it was, she had to get to the bottom of this matter and find out what kind of conspiracy was behind it. The spicy aroma made one's throat burn slightly, but it also made one salivate. She reached out to grab the huge crayfish, and twisted off its head. The plump crayfish butter almost overflowed. The fresh aroma together with the heat wafted over. Even the spiciness couldn't cover it up. Gulp. Angela's throat bobbed. If she had always thought that her obsession with i.e. crayfish restaurant was because of that beautiful lady boss, she was now sure that at least half of it was because of this crayfish that she couldn't forget after tasting it. Slurp. Angela put the crayfish head to her mouth and sucked. Oh, this damn fresh taste. The crayfish butter melted in her mouth without any fishy taste. There was a storm-like spiciness amidst the freshness and sweetness. The reserved aroma was perfectly displayed in this mouthful of crayfish butter. The spicy and fresh aroma were perfectly displayed in this mouthful. The spicy soup was like a scoop of hot water on her taste buds. Her tongue instantly went numb, and the spiciness spread through her tongue. Her body quickly heated up. Slash, accompanied by a crisp sound. A tear appeared on Angela's black blouse, and it almost couldn't stop the surging waves. Yes. This was the smell. This is the feeling. Angela's face was flushed, and her bright eyes were a little blurred. She felt like she was about to get lost in this damn delicacy, but she clearly realized that this was 100% the same taste as the spicy crayfish from i.e. Crayfish Restaurant. Gulp. Harrison, who was sitting across from him, tried his best to avert his gaze and not look at the shocking curve that burst out from the lapel, but he still couldn't help but gulp. What was this? He just wanted to have a meal, that's all. To think that there would be such benefits. However, why did he vaguely sense the holy light? Harrison felt like he had seen something, but at the same time, he felt like he had not seen anything. The beautiful scene of her clothes exploding was actually blocked by a harmonious holy light. Since she ordered the spicy crayfish, it seems like a showdown is inevitable. How should I fool this girl who doesn't look very smart? Meg glanced at Angela, whose chest was blocked by the holy light in the kitchen. This familiar light made him respect her, and his heart was incomparably pure. SSS ha SSS ha. Angela put down the clean crayfish head in her hand and stuck out her tongue, trying to calm her spicy tongue a little. However, this level of spiciness was obviously not something that could be suppressed by sticking out her tongue. She stared at the crayfish meat on the plate, and couldn't wait to grab the crayfish that was as thick as a baby's arm. She easily peeled it from the back of the crayfish, revealing the plump meat inside. She grabbed the meat, dipped it in the soup, and put it into her mouth. She had already gotten used to the spiciness. The plump crayfish meat appeared like a spring breeze calming a huge wave, and then plunged into the deep water. The spicy taste and the fresh crayfish meat blossomed with a breathtaking deliciousness under the contrast of all kinds of spices. The spicy soup and the plump crayfish meat combined perfectly. The fiery taste stimulated her taste buds completely, and almost lifted her head. She could feel the wonderful chewiness of her teeth colliding with the meat as she chewed. The spicy taste was especially refreshing. The spicier it was, the more she chewed. It was so delicious that she couldn't stop. This is too delicious. Angela was screaming in her heart. The taste buds in her mouth were also welcoming this suffocating deliciousness without holding back. It had been a long time. This mouthful of crayfish made her feel the true essence of delicacies. The wonderful taste that she had been yearning for the past few months, the taste that kept tugging at her heartstrings on that small island, the familiar taste that she couldn't find anywhere on Carapace Island, was found in Chaos City thousands of kilometers away. He was sure that this was definitely not a coincidence. There was no chef in this world who could make a spicy crayfish that tasted exactly the same. Such exquisite deliciousness was not something that any chef could master. She was sure that the owner of this restaurant must have some unknown relationship with the owner of i.e. Crayfish Restaurant. Maybe they learned crayfish from the same master? Angela thought as she looked in the direction of the kitchen with her tongue out. "Miss, can I treat you to a glass of beer?" Harrison said to Angela with a smile as he pushed the glass of beer that was just placed on the table towards Angela. Angela retracted her gaze, and looked at the amber liquid in the transparent crystal glass on the table. There was even a layer of white foam floating on the surface. "There's even beer." Angela was shocked again. Although the glass had been changed, this special wine should be the same as the one in IE Crayfish restaurant. Right now, there was a burning sensation in her mouth. If she could have a glass of cold beer, it would naturally be a wonderful thing. Of course, she was more curious if the beer in this restaurant was the same as the one in IE Crayfish restaurant. "Thank you." Angela glanced at Harrison, and made sure that he didn't have any other motives. She thanked him and reached out to take the glass. The faint aroma of hops wafted over. She tilted her head back and took a sip. The cold beer flowed into her mouth, and then down her throat. Slurp. Angela could vaguely hear the beautiful sound of a raging fire being extinguished. The burning sensation was instantly suppressed, and the refreshing feeling went straight to her soul. She couldn't help but clamp her legs together, and let out an involuntary moan. No pop-up window. Chapter 16-17. Angela could confirm that the spicy crayfish and beer she had at Mamie's were exactly the same as the one she had at IE restaurant. That was because she had once believed that no one in this world could make such delicious crayfish other than Boss Hades, let alone make crayfish that tasted exactly the same. However, not only did she taste the same spicy crayfish today, but she also tasted the exact same beer. In this restaurant tens of thousands of miles away from Carapace Island, she found the taste that she had been searching for all this while. Harrison felt that his eyes were going to be blinded by that holy light, so he could only look away. However, it was said that succubi were tempting little spirits. He had finally seen it for himself this time. Even though he couldn't see anything, he still felt like his heartstrings were being tugged. Angela put down the glass, licked her lips, and looked in the direction of the kitchen. She looked at Meg's side profile, and narrowed her eyes slightly. She secretly made up her mind. No matter what kind of relationship this fellow has with Hades, I must find them out. But, how can I get in touch with him? This fellow is completely immune to my eyes of enchantment. It's obviously impossible to enchant him like a normal man. Angela quickly fell into deep thought again. She couldn't help but have a headache when she thought of how that fellow had completely ignored her in the morning. A fellow like that was really too difficult to deal with. "Thank you for the beer." Angela looked away, and casually fastened her clothes again. She looked at Harrison, who was eating a steak with his eyes lowered, and smiled. "Why, you're welcome." Harrison waved his hand, feeling flattered. He smiled sheepishly. It seemed like this glass of beer was very good. It actually succeeded in making this succubus take the initiative to talk to him. "Then, is this restaurant still hiring employees?" "I would like to find a job," Angela continued. "Mamie's probably doesn't need any employees, right? After all, each of the ladies here can take on the role of two. It's so easy to control such a big place." Harrison shook his head. Looking at the troubled Angela, he couldn't help but feel pity for her. "If you're looking for a job, I happen to be looking for a secretary. The job is easy, and the salary isn't low. I wonder if that won't be necessary. I just want to work in this restaurant." Before Harrison could finish, Angela had already declined his offer. I've cracked." Harrison's lips moved. He felt like he had suffered another blow. That was right. There were many young ladies in Chaos City who wanted to marry Mr. Mac, and there were many who wanted to work at Mamie's. After all, many young ladies saw this as a shortcut to becoming the lady boss of Mamis. Of course, even if she couldn't become the lady boss of Mamis, being an employee of Mamis would still be a blissful thing. They didn't need to line up to eat all kinds of delicacies in the restaurant every day. It was said that they could even eat tofu pudding for every meal. This was simply the dream of 900 million young ladies. Angela continued to eat her prawns. She did want to find a job and a place to stay temporarily in Chaos City. She had almost used up all the cash she had to make arrangements for her sisters. Now, she only had less than 500 copper coins in her pocket. Of course, with her talent and beauty, it wasn't difficult for her to earn some money. It was just that she didn't want to earn money by selling her looks and sucking up to men. That would be a humiliation to her. If she could work in this restaurant, she could investigate the relationship between this boss and Boss Hades. At the same time, she could earn her living expenses by working. This was undoubtedly a very good choice. After lunch, Angela paid the bill and left. However, she didn't go far. Instead, she loitered around the restaurant until it closed for business. Ding! Meg removed his apron, and was about to go upstairs to take a nap when he heard the bell. He was slightly stunned, and walked to the door. As soon as Meg opened the door, Angela, who was standing at the door, smiled at Meg, and said, "Hello, I'm Angela." Meg was a little surprised, but he didn't show it. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Hello, how can I help you?" Angela didn't see any change in Meg's expression. She continued to smile, and said, "I want to find a job, so I would like to ask if your restaurant is still hiring waiters." Waiters? Meg sized Angela up with restraint. He thought for a while, and said, "The restaurant is indeed hiring a new employee now." Angela's eyes lit up, and she said with surprise, "Then, can I give it a try?" "According to the usual rules, I need to do a simple assessment of your ability to determine if you are qualified for this job." Meg said calmly, but the corners of his mouth were curled up slightly. He was still thinking about how to get in touch with Angela, and didn't expect her to come knocking on his door. "All right." Angela nodded. Although she felt that these words were a little familiar, she was full of confidence in herself. She was a rare genius of the succubus race, and the only succubus to successfully break through to the 7th level before the age of 20. How could she not be qualified for a mere waitress job? "Please come in." Meg stepped aside to let Angela in. Angela walked in, and when she passed by Meg, she smelled a nice mint fragrance. It was very light, but it gave people a refreshing and clean feeling. Clack. Meg closed the door behind him and locked it. Angela raised her eyebrows when she heard the sound, but soon relaxed. She was an 8th level succubus. Even if she was in the same room with a strange man, she definitely wouldn't be the one to suffer in the end. Moreover, he still couldn't do it. "Have a seat." Meg motioned for Angela to sit down. He poured a cup of warm water for her, and sat down directly opposite her. "Thank you." Angela glanced at the cup of water and didn't rush to drink it. The work at Mamie's is very busy and tiring. The number of guests you have to entertain every day is more than 1,500, but there are very few waiters in the restaurant. "Are you sure you can handle such a heavy workload?" Meg went straight to the point. "I can." Angela nodded confidently. "Then, what are you good at?" Meg continued to ask. "Good at?" "Yes, the employees of Mamie's all have their own specialties. This way, I can assign work according to your abilities and maximize efficiency." Meg nodded. Angela seriously thought for a while, and suddenly her eyes lit up. She looked at Meg and said, "I'm good at seducing people." Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 16-18. Ah. Meg looked at Angela's sparkling eyes. She was really an honest girl. What's wrong? Angela asked in puzzlement when she saw Meg's strange expression. Nothing. It's just that this ability might not be very practical in the restaurant. Meg shook his head. How can that be? I just need to stand at the door, and I believe the number of customers coming to eat in your restaurant will double, Angela said confidently. The problem now is that even if the number of customers in the restaurant is reduced by half, it will still be enough to fill the empty seats in the restaurant. Meg shook his head with a smile. Such a beautiful and attractive succubus lady was indeed the dream hostess of many restaurants. As long as she showed a little bit of her charm, there would be customers lining up to eat. However, Amy's had already passed the stage where they needed to attract customers. There were countless customers who couldn't get in line every day. Then, Angela was a little frustrated when she heard that. She didn't expect her confident charm to be completely useless. After thinking seriously for a while, she said, "Then I can serve the dishes. Your waiters seem to be a little lacking. The speed of serving the dishes should be faster." "Yes, your observation is very detailed. We are indeed lacking a service specialist in charge of the designated hot pot area." Meg nodded. After Shirley went missing, the restaurant hadn't recruited suitable new employees. Now, they were relying on Barbara's spatial magic to support the lack of waiters. It was just that this method of serving the dishes lacked a sense of warmth. "Then can I?" Angela's eyes lit up again. Meg leaned back in his chair and looked at Angela as he said, "I need you to show me that you are qualified for this job." "Okay." Angela looked at Meg. Her blue eyes suddenly flickered, and 3 identical Angela appeared behind her. They bowed slightly to Meg at the same time, and said, "Hello, boss." Clones. Meg looked at the 3 Angela, who looked no different from the real person, and then looked at Angela, who was sitting in front of him, and asked in surprise. Angela was very satisfied with Meg's expression. She said proudly, "Yes, this is my doppelganger, a doppelganger that is half real. It can also take on the task of serving dishes. You recruited me, which means you recruited 4 employees at the same time. I alone can be responsible for the reception work of the designated hot pot area. A man who marries you is truly blessed." Meg muttered in his heart. He was indeed amazed by Angela's sudden display of ability. He smiled and said, "I believe that with your ability, you are qualified for this job." "Thank you." A smile appeared in Angela's eyes. As expected, as long as she showed her ability, there was nothing she couldn't handle. Meg stood up and extended his hand to Angela with a smile. "I'm Meg. You can call me boss like the other employees." "Angela, welcome to Mamie's." "Thank you." Angela also stood up and shook Meg's hand. She had a strange feeling when she heard Meg's announcement. "It's lunch break now, and the employees are not in the restaurant. I will introduce them to you at night." Meg sat down again, and said to Angela, "Let's have a good talk about the remuneration and benefits. We will sign a labor contract. It will be a guarantee for both parties." "Labor contract?" Angela looked at Meg in bewilderment. "It's just a contract. This is a rule unique to Chaos City. It's to protect you working people," Meg explained with a smile. "Oh." Although Angela found it a little strange, she did as the Romans did, so she didn't think too much about it. "Our restaurant's employees have a trial period of 1 month, and their salary during the trial period is 3,000 copper coins a month. However, due to your special ability, your salary during the trial period is 6,000 copper coins. After the 1-month trial period, I will evaluate your workability. After you pass the trial period, your salary will be raised to 10,000 copper coins a month, 10,000 copper coins. Only enough for 10 spicy crayfish. Angela frowned. She felt that this salary was not in line with her expectations. The restaurant will provide 3 meals a day for the employees. All the dishes on the menu can be chosen. Currently, the meal supplement standard has been changed to have no upper limit, Meg explained with a smile. 1 crayfish per meal. Angela's eyes lit up. If you're not sick of it, up to you. Meg nodded. That sounds very good. Angela could not wait to sign the contract. Meg smiled. Indeed, no one could resist the attack of delicacies. He continued, do you have a place to stay in Chaos City? If not, the restaurant can provide a staff dormitory for you to stay with the other employees. It will be nearer to the restaurant, so it will be more convenient for you to go to work. I've just arrived at Chaos City. I don't have a place to stay. Angela shook her head honestly. It would be best if she could have a place to stay. She did not want to go around looking for a place to stay. It was too troublesome. All right. Then you can go back with the other colleagues after the dinner service ends. Meg nodded. He asked Angela to wait for a while he went upstairs to draft a labor contract. He used a contract paper that had the effect of a contract. Take a look at this labor contract. If you think there's no problem, sign your name at the back and put your thumbprint on it. Meg placed the labor contract in front of Angela, and reminded, the main thing is to look at the salary and benefits I promised you just now. Salary, benefits. Angela picked up the contract and looked at it seriously. The salary and benefits were indeed as Meg said, and the restrictions on the boss were very strict. If he did not follow the contract, not only would he have to pay 10 times the compensation, he would also be imprisoned. It was the first time Angela had heard of such a conscientious boss. But, what does this confidentiality agreement mean? Can't I mention anything about the restaurant to others? Angela asked as she pointed to a clause in the employee's code of conduct. It said, employees are not allowed to discuss anything about the restaurant and the boss' personal life. They are not allowed to reveal any information that is not allowed by the boss to any third party. It's a restaurant. We have to keep it a secret. Otherwise, the streets will be filled with spicy crayfish in a few days. Meg looked at Angela nonchalantly and smilingly said, you're not here to spy on the recipe, are you? I'm not interested in cooking. Angela shook her head, and signed her name at the bottom of the contract. At the same time, she pricked her thumb, and pressed her thumbprint on her name. A golden light shone from the contract, and split into 2. It was imprinted on Meg's and Angela's foreheads respectively. Very good. The contract has been signed successfully. Meg kept the contract with a smile. Boss, have you been to the Demon Islands before? Angela asked Meg calmly as she licked her fingers. Yeah, I've been to Carapace Island. Meg nodded nonchalantly as well. Chapter 16-19. Angela stared at Meg. She really didn't expect the word she wanted to hear to come out of Meg's mouth so easily. Carapace Island. Angela tried her best to control her emotions as she stared into Meg's eyes and asked, when did you go there? I forgot. My memory isn't very good. Meg shook his head slightly. He had already gotten the contract and signed the confidentiality agreement, so he had the initiative now. Even if Angela knew something, she would be bound by the contract and couldn't say anything. Then what did you go to Carapace Island for? I heard that it's a very chaotic island, and there's nothing special about it. Angela pretended to be curious and asked. Oh, that. Meg looked at Angela with a smile, and said, it's a secret. Ah. This fellow. Angela looked at Meg's naughty smile, and wanted to slap a chair on his face angrily. She felt that the answer was about to come out, but he just had to stop her. Angela didn't want to beat around the bush, and asked Meg directly. I stayed on Carapace Island for a period of time previously. There's a restaurant called IE Crayfish Restaurant there, and the boss is called Hades. The crayfish and beer he makes are exactly the same as the ones I had at Mamie's. May I ask if you guys know each other? Hades? He's my disciple. Meg nodded. Disciple? Yes. Back then, there was a young crayfish monster who came from afar and came to me to seek. To be my disciple. I took him in as my disciple because of his sincerity and taught him how to make 3 types of crayfish and how to brew beer. However, he went around showing off his culinary skills. I saw that he was stubborn and difficult to teach, so I chased him out of my sect and ordered him not to mention my sect to anyone. So many years have passed in the blink of an eye, Meg lamented. But I feel like he's older than you. Angela looked at Meg with uncertainty. If culinary skills are related to age, wouldn't everyone in the giant dragon tribe be a chef? Meg asked. No. I mean, young man. He's growing fast and looks old. Meg coughed dryly. Angela looked at Meg doubtfully. She felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Speaking of which, I haven't heard from him for many years. I wonder how he is now. Are you still selling prawns? Meg asked, looking like a caring teacher. I was about to ask you the same thing. Angela rolled her eyes and shook her head. His restaurant on Carapace Island was overthrown, and he's gone missing. Alas, it looks like we won't have the chance to see each other again. Meg sighed sadly. Could he really be Boss Hades' master? Angela looked at Meg, who looked a little dejected, and started to accept this strange setting. She even felt that she had mentioned something she shouldn't have, which made Meg a little dejected. She shrugged and said, Sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned this person. It's all right. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten that I had a disciple. Let bygones be bygones. I'll still have a disciple. Meg regained his sunny smile, and waved his hand nonchalantly. Ha! Angela's eyes widened, and she didn't know how to react. Do you have any plans after coming to Chaos City? Do you have any expectations for this job? Meg changed the topic, and asked Angela curiously. Back then, she suddenly left Carapace Island, and took all the succubi with her. He wondered if she had designs on the succubi in Chaos City. I think Chaos City is a very interesting and special city, so I plan to live here for a while. Angela nodded. After pondering for a while, she said, As for the job, it will last for at least a year. That's pretty good. Meg nodded. He didn't want to hire another employee who was on a one-day trip. After getting Angela's promise, he stood up and said, Suit yourself. I'm going to take an afternoon nap. That's it. Angela stood up. She was still in a daze. You're a qualified interviewee. You met me, who is thirsty for talents, so things naturally became simple, Meg said with a smile, and turned to go upstairs. Something doesn't seem right, but there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. Angela sat back down in her seat, and took a sip of warm water to calm herself down. From today onwards, she had a boss too. Before entering the bedroom, Meg went to the study to take a look at Hannah, who was still seriously drawing. Hannah's messy and greasy hair was tied up casually with a pencil. She had a pair of slippers on her feet, and a deformed pencil in her mouth as she pondered seriously. Meg suddenly felt a little guilty for turning a top brewer into a top-notch drawing dog. She was supposed to have such a bright and beautiful youth. Why did she have to learn how to draw? Hannah, who heard the sound, looked up, and saw Meg standing at the door. Her eyes lit up, and she waved at him. Boss, come over for a while. Can you help me see if there are any problems with this drawing? Meg walked over and solved Hannah's problem simply. He also pointed out a few obvious mistakes in the design for her, and then left suavely under Hannah's admiring gaze. That's great. Boss has solved the problem that I couldn't figure out for the past 2 days. Now, I only need to complete the overall planning, and then I can start to try to build the prototype. Hannah took a sip of the goji berries in the thermos cup beside her, and once again immersed herself in her work with great enthusiasm. In the evening, Mia and the others came to the restaurant one after another. When they saw Angela sitting in the restaurant, they all looked a little surprised. Let me introduce everyone. This is Angela, the restaurant's new employee. Meg stood up and introduced. Hello everyone, I'm Angela. I'll be working in the restaurant from today onwards. I hope everyone can take care of me. Angela looked at everyone with a smile. Her eyes gradually lit up as she glanced at the girls present. Oh my God, what kind of restaurant is this? The waitresses are all so beautiful. She was too concerned about the crayfish before that she didn't notice this. Why does this coquettish succubus exude a familiar aura? Could it be that she is also? Camilla looked at Angela, and her eyes narrowed slightly. There was a hint of unusualness in her eyes. She. Angela's gaze fell on Camilla as if she sensed something. She also revealed a hint of doubt. The other party seemed to be a vampire demon. She was elegant and beautiful, but the aura she exuded was completely different from the other waitresses. Is this the same kind of feeling? No pop-up window. Chapter 1620. Yo, did you hire a little succubus? Interesting. Right at this moment, a voice with a hint of laughter sounded. A faint golden light flashed, and Irina appeared in the restaurant. Her long silver dress fell slowly, and her long silver hair was casually draped behind her back. Her skin was fairer than snow, and her features were as exquisite as a painting. There was a small golden moon mark in between her brows, and a faint golden glow enveloped her. Her small pointy ears were so white and thin that they seemed to be able to pass through light. So beautiful. Angela looked at Irina, who had suddenly appeared, and was a little dazed. She looked exactly the same as the lady boss that she had seen on Carapace Island back then, and couldn't forget about her. This fellow indeed has an ulterior motive. Meg looked at the dazed Angela, and pursed his lips. He actually took a fancy to his wife. This was intolerable. Do I look good? Irina asked with a smile as she looked at Angela, who was a little dazed. Yes. Angela nodded. She suddenly came back to her senses, and her face flushed red instantly. Irina smiled at Angela and said, I am Irina, Amy's special guest. I am also the only guest who doesn't have to line up to eat. Irina. Irina. Angela's eyes widened as she looked at Irina in disbelief. Isn't this the legendary elf princess? Although she had been staying on the small island, she had heard of Irina's rumors. She didn't expect to meet her here. Father, I'm back. Someone knocked on the door, and Amy's voice came out. Mia went over to open the door. Ugly Duckling, who was sleeping on the counter, suddenly stood up, slid down the edge of the counter, and ran towards the door. It jumped into Amy's arms, and rubbed its head against her chin. Ugly Duckling, did you secretly eat something again? I feel like you've gotten fatter again, Amy said with disdain as she pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked at Amy aggrievedly and stuck out its tongue, trying to prove that it didn't. Hey! Amy's gaze landed on Angela, and she said in surprise, Isn't this big sister Angela? Angela looked at Amy. It's that cute half-elf girl again. But why does she know my name? Yes. From today onwards, she will be a member of our restaurant, Mag said with a smile. Little Amy, let me introduce myself. Hello, I'm AI Me. You can call me Xiaomi, AI Me said with a smile. Hello, Xiaomi. Angela was a little confused by the father and daughter's actions, but she still nodded. So. Of course, you. Of course. Of. Yes. Angela nodded. Although she felt that she could easily adapt to such a simple job, she didn't refute Meg's words. She decided to be more obedient on the first day. Everyone got to know each other briefly, and then started the busy preparation work before the opening. Meg called Amy to the side and told her to keep Xiao Ai's secret. Then, he started to get busy too. Angela didn't have anything to do. She saw Amy, who was squatting beside a pillar, training the cat. She walked over and asked with a smile, Amy, what are you doing? I'm teaching Ugly Duckling how to climb a tree. It's too fat. It needs to climb a tree, Amy said seriously. She pointed at the dried fish and Ugly Duckling hanging on the pillar, and said, Ugly Duckling, if you climb up, that dried fish will be yours. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at the dried fish and licked its mouth. It stretched its limbs and climbed up the pillar. However, it had only climbed up about half a meter before it slid down while hugging the pillar. Continue, Amy said coldly as she stood at the side with her arms crossed. Meow. Ugly Duckling called out, and once again hugged the pillar and climbed up. This time, it climbed up another half a meter. However, it soon slid down while hugging the pillar weakly. It was still a long way from the dried fish that was more than 2 meters tall. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling turned its head to look at Amy and called out aggrievedly. Continue. Amy was unmoved. Angela watched the round fat cat jump onto the pillar again and again. It climbed up with all its might, trying to get close to the roasted dried fish. However, no matter how hard it tried, the closest it got to the dried fish was still half a meter away. Meow. Ugly Duckling slid down from the pillar again and lay on the ground weakly, revealing its fat belly. Its fat face was full of despair. Who am I? Why am I here? Amy put the dried fish down from the pillar, threw it into her mouth, and chewed on it. She nodded at Ugly Duckling and said, you've improved a little today. Let's continue tomorrow. Ugly Duckling looked at this scene with wide eyes. Its head tilted, and it passed away on the spot. All right, stop pretending to be dead. I'll prepare a vegetarian diet set for you later. Amy poked Ugly Duckling's stomach with the tip of her foot. Meow. Ugly Duckling turned around and ignored Amy. My baby is emotional. Since that's the case, let's not eat tonight. Amy shrugged nonchalantly. Meow, meow, meow. Ugly Duckling got up from the ground and hugged Amy's calf. Angela watched this scene from the side with a motherly smile. What an adorable little fellow. I'm about to melt. Amy picked Ugly Duckling up in her arms and asked Angela, Big Sister Angela, are you looking for me? Nothing. I'm just bored. Angela shook her head. Then, she curiously asked, but, how does Amy know my name? I don't think we've met before this afternoon, right? Amy tilted her head and thought for a while. Maybe, we've met in a dream. I thought of it when I saw Big Sister Angela. This. Angela was stunned. Although she felt this reason was a little far-fetched, it seemed to be quite convincing coming from Amy. A cute girl like her was always right? Then, what about Big Sister Angela? Why did you come to the restaurant to be a waitress? Amy asked curiously. Angela looked embarrassed. Her initial purpose was naturally to understand the relationship between Amy's and IE restaurant. She didn't expect to find out so soon after she joined. Now, she sighed. Because I got a disease called poverty. It's okay. This disease is usually incurable, Amy consoled her. Alright, we've successfully queued up. Now, we just have to wait for the restaurant to open. Vanessa held Sean's hand and stood at the back of the line. She stood on her tiptoes to look ahead, and confirmed that they could get a turn from where they were standing. No pop-up window. Chapter 1621. Do you have to line up like this every time you eat? Sean, who had changed into a black suit, frowned as he looked at the line of nearly 100 people. He then turned to Vanessa with an incredulous expression. Yeah, it's super fun to line up outside Amy's. Look at the 4 long lines in front of the restaurant. The 2 lines on the left are for the normal restaurant, and the 2 lines on the right are for the hot pot. The 2 lines on the left are the savory ones, and the sweet ones are the savory ones. The ones on the right are the sweet ones, and the ones on the left are the sweet ones. That's the line we're in right now. Vanessa nodded with a smile on her face. You're forcing ignorant newbies to join the sweet ones. The savory ones are the righteous ones. Abraham harumphed. That's not it. The sweet ones are the right way to eat tofu pudding. The savory ones are the evildoers. Vanessa was indignant. Sweet ones. Savory ones. Sean was a little perplexed. Why were there different parties when it came to eating? Oh, I forgot to explain to you. The salty and sweet parties came about because of a bowl of tofu pudding. The tofu pudding with sugar is the sweet party, while the tofu pudding with pickled vegetables and sauce is the salty party. I think brother will like it sweet, right? Vanessa blinked as she looked at Sean. Her face was saying, hurry up and nod your head. Alright, then I'll eat something sweet. Sean nodded with a smile. He looked at his impatient little sister, who had never shown much interest in anything. It was as if she had become a completely different person during this time. Acting coquettishly. You're cheating. Abraham sighed as he looked at the smug Vanessa with a smile in his eyes. How did it go, big brother? Vanessa asked as she looked at Sean with a curious expression. They had just met at the entrance of the restaurant, and she had hurriedly dragged them to the back of the line. Yeah, it's pretty much done. We're going back tomorrow. Sean nodded with a smile. Then. Do you have to take me back? Vanessa's expression immediately became a little dejected. Yes. You've been away from home for so long, so it's about time you went home. Sean nodded with a firm expression. But, I was ordered to come here. If I can't bring you back, his father won't be happy, Sean said as he looked into Vanessa's eyes. Vanessa looked at Sean. It was no secret that her eldest brother and second brother were vying for the position of crown prince, and the decision was in her father's hands. She would feel bad if her father thought badly of him because of her. After hesitating for a while, she snorted and said, Brother Sean is a bad guy. A hint of tenderness appeared in Sean's eyes upon seeing that Vanessa didn't reject his offer. He patted her head with a smile, and said, I'll take you out for some good food when we get back to Rodu. The most delicious restaurant in the world is right here, but I have to go so far away from it in search of delicious food. It's tragic. Vanessa sighed with a hint of melancholy. Is Miss Windsor leaving? Randy, who was not far away, asked. I'm going home. Vanessa turned to look at Randy and nodded helplessly. Sean also turned to look at Randy, and scanned him from head to toe with his sharp gaze. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the powerful aura that he had gained from his military experience naturally emanated. Randy felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by Sean, who was emitting an inexplicable sense of hostility. This man who was like a sharp spear had eyebrows that resembled Vanessa. He should be her brother. He grinned at him, and then looked at Vanessa with a regretful expression, and said, "If that's the case, I've lost a friend who can eat the insanely spicy hot pot with me." "It's all right, Randy. We can still eat clear soup hot pot." Abraham looked at Randy with a smile. "Clear soup is so good. It's good for health." "Forget it. Clear soup is so boring." Randy shook his head with interest. However, his eyes soon lit up, and he said, "I just heard from the people in front that Mr. Mac is going to launch another exciting new product today." "Really?" Vanessa, who was still a little sad, was suddenly energized. She looked at Randy with glowing eyes, and said, "Didn't they just launch the new product a few days ago? Mr. Mac is already so prolific." "Exactly. Any dish from Mamie's would be the signature dish of any other restaurant. However, he's launching a new dish every 3 to 5 days. This fellow is simply a monster in human form." Randy nodded in agreement. As a man who had been wandering around the Norland continent with a gluttonous sense for food, he stopped in Chaos City mainly because of Mamie's. To be honest, the efficiency of him searching for a decent delicacy was even lower than Boss Mag's efficiency of creating a new delicacy. "Look, is this something that ordinary people can do?" "What's the new product?" Vanessa asked. If she was going home tomorrow, it would be a good farewell if she could eat Mr. Mac's new product today. "This is really very exciting. Are you sure you want to hear it?" Randy asked with a strange expression. "Of course. I'm going to order it later. How can I miss out on Mr. Mac's new product?" Vanessa nodded with certainty. The customers who were in a hurry to line up and didn't have time to see the announcement on the little blackboard also pricked up their ears. They were all curious about the new product that Mr. Mac was going to launch today. How could it be worthy of the word exciting? Randy cleared his throat, and then said, "Mr. Mac's epic new product today is roasted pig's eyes." There was a sudden silence, and then a commotion. Roasted pig's eyes. Vanessa's eyes widened, and the image of eyes being placed on a grill appeared in her mind. She suddenly felt her stomach churning, and felt uncomfortable. Many customers around had similar reactions. They felt uncomfortable just by hearing the name of the dish. Roasted pig's eyes. Sean frowned. The name of the dish sounded strange. He didn't expect that someone would cook pig's eyes as a separate dish. "Mr. Mac. You're finally going down the dark path." "Not bad, I like it." Abraham chuckled, showing some anticipation. Roasted pig's eyes. Vanessa's gaze landed on Sean, and a sly look appeared in her eyes. She then put on a sad expression and looked at Sean. "Brother, I'm going back tomorrow. Will you agree to any request I have today?" Sean looked at Vanessa, smiled, and nodded. "Yes, as long as it's within my ability." Vanessa's eyes lit up, and she smiled. "Okay, you said it. You can't go back on your words." Chapter 16:22. The announcement of the roasted pig's eyes was a good topic for the customers lining up in front of Amy's. There were even people arguing about whether the pig's eyes should be skewered and roasted or placed directly on a fine mesh grill. But arguments were just arguments. Because the name of the dish was too direct and brutal, not many people showed any desire to try it. Of course, more people were eager to try the dish that someone else had ordered. Whoever dared to be the first warrior would definitely be the center of attention. "Father, why aren't we eating roasted pig's eyes tonight?" Amy looked at the table full of dishes and asked Meg in confusion. "Because only the two of us want to eat it now. If we serve it to the table, it might affect other people's appetites. So, Amy, I'll roast another skewer for you after the restaurant opens, okay?" Meg said with a smile. Amy was probably the only one who would unconditionally believe that everything he cooked was delicious and show an unusual interest in it. Okay. Amy nodded happily and stuck out 2 fingers. I want 2 skewers. Okay, 2 skewers. Meg nodded with a smile and put a piece of red braised pork in her bowl. Thank you. Amy bit off half of the meat and chewed happily. Then, she ate a big mouthful of rice. She looked cute and appetizing. What a scene of a loving father and a filial daughter. Angela ate her rice and looked at this scene enviously. Speaking of which, she hadn't eaten at the same table with so many people she knew in a long time. It was a very strange feeling. Then, her gaze landed on Irina. She was eating her fried rice in small bites. Her body seemed to be emitting a soft golden glow. She was so elegant and beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. What's wrong? Irina asked with a smile as she raised her head and met Angela's eyes. No, nothing. Angela blushed and quickly lowered her head to eat. Even the tips of her ears were red. But I heard them talking at the door just now. They seem to be a little afraid of roasted pig's eyes. I wonder if any customers will order it. Mia was a little worried. Although she had unlimited confidence in Meg, the roasted pig's eyes were still a little too violent. She wondered how many people would still have the courage to try it after seeing the name of the dish. Why don't you give it a better name? Irina put down her spoon and suggested to Meg, for example, Bloody Eye or Demon's Eyes. This name doesn't sound better at all, okay? Meg rolled his eyes. What kind of dish name was this? Where's the exploding eye? Amy raised her hand. This. Meg pondered. The window to the roasted pig's soul, Anna suggested. What a gentle name. Meg gave Anna a thumbs up. The first gathering after Angela joined them ended in a warm and friendly atmosphere. Welcome, Amy's. Meg opened the restaurant's door and welcomed the customers with a smile. Angela stood in the corner and watched the customers enter the restaurant one after another. Although she had worked as a very amateur service staff for 2 days on Carapace Island, she still felt a little nervous and expectant as she stood here. Although this brand new job wasn't what she wanted in life, it was a good start in Chaos City. You don't have to do anything today. Just get to know the restaurant's operations from an employee's perspective, Meg said to Angela with a smile as he walked past her on his way to the kitchen. Angela nodded and stood sideways behind the counter. Big sister Angela, don't be nervous. You'll be even more nervous when you do it yourself, Amy consoled her with a smile as she placed Ugly Duckling's head under her chin. Angela nodded. She couldn't accept such consolation. Let's sit here. Vanessa and the rest sat at the last table near the kitchen. They could see some of the scenes in the kitchen through the glass display window from here. There's no private room. Sean looked around. There was only one transparent hall in this restaurant. Although the wooden railings made a simple separation, it couldn't completely block out the view and sound. He was not used to having dinner with a group of complete strangers, and there were even orcs and demons among them. Amy's doesn't need a private room. Everyone has to share a table. Vanessa shook her head with a smile. She couldn't wait to pick up the menu on the table. After flipping it open, there was indeed a new dish under the beef kebab, roasted pig's eyes, 300 copper coins per kebab. It was a pity that there wasn't a picture of this roasted pig's eyes. However, this made her feel a little lucky. If she saw pig's eyes staring at her when she flipped open the menu, she probably wouldn't have any appetite for the day. This is really a new dish that I'm looking forward to. I wonder which brave warrior will be brave enough to step forward and give it a try, Abraham said with a smile. There was a hint of anticipation in his smile. I think this brave warrior is in front of us now. Vanessa turned the menu around and pushed it in front of Sean, who was sitting opposite her. She smiled and said, "Big brother Sean, I'll order a set of roasted pig's eyes for you. You have to eat something different when you're in Chaos City." I don't really want to eat that," Sean said with an awkward expression. Even someone like him who could shoot a wild boar's eyeball out with a look couldn't accept this so-called roasted pig's eyes. "No, you promised me just now. You said you would agree to all my requests today." Vanessa shook her head with a pout. Then, she pointed at the roasted pig's eyes on the menu with a pale finger, and said, "My request is very simple. You can eat a skewer of roasted pig's eyes." Sean opened his mouth. He felt as if he had fallen into this little kitten's trap. He didn't expect her to come up with such a way to take revenge on him. "I heard it. I can testify." Abraham raised his hand to show that he wasn't afraid of blowing things up. Sean looked at the expectant Vanessa and the smiling Abraham, and nodded helplessly. "All right. Hee. I knew Big Brother Sean is the best," Vanessa said happily. The customers ordered their dishes one after another, but they seemed to have reached a consensus. They avoided ordering the roasted pig's eyes, and were all waiting for a brave warrior to jump out and be the first to eat the roasted pig's eyes. Hence, when Yabamiya came to Vanessa's table, no one had ordered a skewer of roasted pig's eyes yet. "What would you like to order?" Yabamiya asked with a smile. "Big Sister Mia, we'd like a skewer of roasted pig's eyes," Vanessa said eagerly. "Roasted pig's eyes." Yabamiya looked at Vanessa in shock. The customers also looked over curiously. They wanted to see which brave warrior ordered the roasted pig's eyes and took an important step in the culinary world. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1623. Yes, a skewer of roasted pig's eyes. Vanessa nodded with a smile. Shawan's lips twitched, but he held himself back and didn't refuse. He was, after all, a great general who had been on the battlefield. How could he be intimidated by a skewer of roasted pig's eyes? His royal father had sent him to Chaos City with the most important purpose of bringing Vanessa home. If he didn't complete this mission, he would have failed the mission no matter how well he did. "All right, please hold on for a moment." Mia nodded, and continued to order other dishes before walking to the kitchen. "So it's that insanely spicy lady. A warrior who dares to face insanely spicy is indeed extraordinary." Everyone looked at Vanessa. During this period, Vanessa, Abraham, and the rest were very active in the designated hot pot area, and had gained some fame among the customers for ordering insanely spicy dishes. After all, the insanely spicy was not only a test of one's mouth and stomach, but also one's anus. This kind of insanely spicy, or even double or triple the insanely spicy, was not something that ordinary people could accept. However, they didn't expect her to be the first to order the roasted pig's eyes that everyone was afraid of. "Uncle, aren't you very interested in this new dish? Why don't you order a skewer and try it?" Vanessa asked Abraham strangely. "There's no hurry. Since you've already ordered it, let Sean try the poison first," Abraham said with a chuckle. "Sean. That's not a bad idea." Vanessa nodded with a sly smile. "Since you're rushing me home, I'll let you eat something that will leave a lasting impression on you." "Boss, Miss Vanessa's table ordered a set of roasted pig's eyes." "Other than that, no one else ordered it," Mia said to Meg after entering the kitchen. That's good. At least someone ordered it, right?" Meg said with a smile. He looked up at Vanessa and the rest who were sitting at the table facing the window. His gaze paused on Sean for a while, and his lips curled up slightly. He quickly shifted his gaze away, and continued to stir the wok in his hands. "That's true. Mia nodded. 10 plates of Yangzhou fried rice. Meg shook the big spoon and filled up the plates on the side in the blink of an eye. He signaled Barbara, who was standing at the side, to serve the dishes. How long do I have to wait? Sean glanced at the restaurant that was full of people. They were at the last table. If the dishes were served according to the order, it would probably take a long time. There's no need for that. Mr. Mack is a fast cook, Vanessa said confidently as she turned to look in the direction of the kitchen. Sean raised his head and glanced in the direction of the kitchen. From his position, he could see a lot of space in the kitchen through the transparent display window. The bright kitchen area was not small. Although there were many things placed in it, it did not look messy at all. A somewhat familiar figure wandered between different kitchen utensils, skillfully controlling the entire kitchen, and constantly sending out delicacies. The most eye-catching thing was the grill that was almost directly in front of him. The charcoal fire was already burning, but there were no ingredients on it yet. Don't tell me the pig's eyes are being grilled here. Sean frowned slightly. He had a bad feeling in his heart. Before he could retract his gaze, Meg had already walked over with a transparent crystal basin. In the crystal basin, there were huge pig's eyes piled up densely. Even though he was used to seeing bloody scenes on the battlefield, he still felt his scalp tingle. He's here, he's here. He's here with the pig's eyes. Abraham, on the other hand, craned his neck with great interest. For an excellent foodie, he had to have enough curiosity and a keen sense of smell when it came to unusual ingredients. He could wait for a while, but he had to maintain enough attention and not let himself miss any of the delicacies. Really? Vanessa covered her face with her hands. Then, she slowly turned her head and peeked through the gaps between her fingers. She immediately turned her head back, and her expression changed slightly. Wow, that's so scary. They're really huge eyeballs. Laura, who was sitting beside her, trembled. She did not dare to turn around to look. It's just pig's eyes. There's nothing to worry about. Sean coughed dryly, and waved his hand with a calm expression. Brother Sean is such a brave person. He actually dares to watch Mr. Mack grill pig's eyes, Vanessa said with admiration. Sean, who was about to look away, froze. His Adam's apple moved, and he could only continue to put on a calm expression. He watched the man in the display window reach out and pick up an eyeball from the crystal basin. Then, he deftly pierced it with a bamboo skewer. He repeated the process a few times, and a string of pig's eyes with 5 eyeballs was pierced. The eyeballs were dug out from the roots, and there were still traces of blood in them. The eyeballs were clear, and they looked very fresh. They should have been dug out not long ago. After being pierced into a string, they looked even more strange. It was as if he was being stared at by multiple eyes, and it made him feel a little uncomfortable. Meg saw Sean's expression change from the corner of his eye. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he twirled the string of pig's eyes on his fingertips. He first put it on the grill, then quickly pierced 2 more skewers, and put them on the grill at the same time with a small fire. A qualified string of roasted pig's eyes had to be roasted slowly on the grill for 20 minutes. It was a test of patience and one's control of the fire. Sitting in front of the grill and watching the entire process was also a test of the diner's psychological endurance. After all, this kind of scene was indeed not so simple. The game of eye-to-eye had officially begun. Many customers who were close to the display window couldn't help but look out of curiosity. Many of them immediately retracted their gazes, indicating that they couldn't accept it. There were also a few customers who had strong tastes who stared at Meg curiously. They wanted to see how Meg was going to roast these seemingly terrifying pig's eyes. The pig's eyes were placed on the grill that had been preheated for a while. The subcutaneous fat on the surface of the pig's eyes started to sizzle, and the round eyeballs started to gradually change shape and color. This was a very slow process. If one wanted to see this change clearly, they would have to look at the dead pig's eyes and stare at them seriously. In order to maintain his image as an iron-blooded soldier and a brave older brother, Sean looked at the process of Meg roasting the pig's eyes with a happy expression. His pupils gradually dilated, and his gaze landed on Meg more often. He had seen this chef once at the palace banquet. When he stood in the kitchen, he did indeed give off the feeling of a victorious general standing on the battlefield. He had only seen this kind of aura from that person before. Back then, he could only stand behind that person and watch him lead the border army to unbelievable victories one after another. It wasn't until that person disappeared and he took over that position that he gradually understood that this kind of aura wasn't something that could be possessed by standing in that position. He just didn't expect that a small chef could actually have such an aura. He didn't know if it was because the eyeballs were too impactful, or if it was something else, but he had this kind of illusion. Chapter 1624. Wow, the pig's eyes look really good. Big Sister Anna, do you want a skewer? Amy had run to the window and was standing on her tiptoes to look in. Her face was full of anticipation as she turned to look at Anna, who was standing behind her with Ugly Duckling in her arms. No. Anna shook her head firmly. She shrank her head and didn't dare to look into the window. How about Big Sister Angela? Do you want a skewer? Amy turned to look at Angela, who was standing behind the counter. I don't want one either. Angela shook her head as well. Just hearing the name of roasted pig's eyes was enough to scare her, let alone trying it herself. All right, looks like I'm the only one who can enjoy such delicacies, Amy said regretfully. Little Amy wants to eat roasted pig's eyes too. Vanessa heard the conversation and couldn't help but turn to look at Amy in surprise. Yes, Father roasted 3 skewers. 2 of them are mine. Amy nodded and then said, Then, did Big Sister Vanessa order the remaining skewer? Yes, but it's not for me. It's for my brother. Vanessa nodded with a smile and looked at Amy with admiration. Little Boss was really a brave little foodie. She even dared to try something as scary as roasted pig's eyes. That's such a pity. Father's roasted pig's eyes must be very delicious, but you ordered it for someone else, Amy said regretfully. This little girl, is she really not afraid at all? Sean looked at Amy in surprise. He still had some impression of this little girl. She was Crassus and Julian's precious disciple. It was just that he didn't see the 2 great magic casters in the restaurant today. Crassus should be negotiating with Brent and Elliot now. The triennial magic caster tournament of the Magus Tower was about to be held. As an important founder of the Magus Tower and the fixed opening of the magic caster tournament, the Magus Tower would definitely invite him to participate. Perhaps he could see this little girl again in Rodu. However, she was too young, so she probably wouldn't officially participate in the Great Magician Conference. After all, the youngest age group started from the age of 10. Little Boss, do you want to eat roasted pig's eyes? Many customers also heard Amy's words and couldn't help but cast concerned glances at her. As the #1 spokesperson for Amy's, as well as the #1 salesperson for new products, Amy's every taste test would drive the sales of a new product. This extraordinary appeal stemmed from her appetizing taste test performances, as well as the slogan that had gradually spread, "Follow the little boss and you won't step on any landmines." Therefore, Amy's decision to try the roasted pig's eyes meant that they had a chance to examine this new dish that sounded terrifying. Since Little Boss wants to test the poison himself, this should be a delicacy in terms of probability. But whether to try it or not, it's really hard to choose. Harrison rubbed his chin, feeling a little conflicted. Then, his gaze fell on the counter, and his eyes widened when he saw Angela standing behind the counter. Fuck, Mr. Mac is heartless. This fucking arrangement is made just like that. I don't have to do anything, and I can get paid handsomely. Instead, I'm willing to work as a receptionist. What kind of world is this? Harrison sniffed and felt that life wasn't as beautiful as it used to be. Even the beef kebab in his hand didn't smell good. Miss Mia, give me another glass of vodka. Harrison raised his hand and gestured. After a pause, he said, and give me 10 skewers of roasted pig's eyes. Wow, the surrounding customers all looked at him. This was a true warrior. Could it be that this roasted pig's eyes is also limited daily? George, who was sitting opposite him, was also a little confused. Although professionals like them had a lot of trust in Mr. Mac, when it came to such a controversial new product, they would still wait for a while to evaluate it before making a move. He didn't expect Harrison to act so quickly this time, and he couldn't help but feel a little suspicious. Yabamiya looked at Harrison with a little surprise. She didn't know what had triggered this chubby little brother who had always been carefree to order 10 skewers of roasted pig's eyes in one go. However, she still nodded very professionally and said, "All right, please wait a moment." George went forward with a sad face and said, "We were born from the same root. Why are you in such a hurry to torture each other? Get lost." Harrison rolled his eyes. Why? Is there an inside story? Nothing. I just suddenly felt like eating something heavy to relieve my mood. Harrison shook his head slightly sadly. George was a little confused. He could only say, "All right, I'll see little boss try it first before deciding if I want to try this new product." Meg didn't forget to roast the pig's eyes and stir-fry the vegetables at the same time. Dish after dish was continuously brought out from the kitchen. The pig's eyes on the grill were also brushed with layers of sauce, and gradually turned brown. The scary color and appearance faded away, and they slowly turned into meatballs. Sean, Vanessa, and Abraham were chatting casually. Because they were hiding their identities, they only talked about trivial things. However, his eyes couldn't help but take a look at the roasted pig's eyes from time to time. It had to be said that the pig's eyes on the grill that were sizzling with oil had already started to glow with a tempting oily glow. If he hadn't seen the pig's eyes slowly being roasted from blood red to the way they were now, he probably wouldn't have been so against them. "All right, serve these pig's eyes to the customers." Meg sprinkled cumin and pepper powder on the pig's eyes. He took out 2 plates, placed the roasted pig's eyes in his hands on them, and said to Yabamiya, "These 2 skewers are for Amy. Remember to remind her to leave them for a while before eating. Be careful, it's hot." "All right." Harrison ordered 10 skewers of roasted pig's eyes, Yabamiya said as she took the plates. "All right." Meg nodded. He deftly skewered the 10 skewers of pig's eyes, placed them on the grill, and continued cooking. "Your roasted pig's eyes." Mia placed the plate with the roasted pig's eyes in front of Sean. Then, she placed the other plate in front of Amy, who was already sitting obediently on the high stool behind the counter. "Thank you, big sister Mia," Amy said obediently as she reached out to take the roasted pig's eyes. Boss said to wait a while before eating. "Be careful, it's hot," Mia reminded her. "Oh." Amy retracted her hand halfway and said obediently, "Okay, I'll wait a while before eating." The counter was taller than a normal table, and the angle was just right for everyone in the hall to see from all directions. Everyone looked at the 2 skewers of roasted pig's eyes on the plate in front of Amy. They could roughly make out the brownish-yellow pig's eyes, but they were not as scary as they looked. They looked a little like roasted meatballs. However, when they thought about how these round balls were actually pig's eyes, many people still found it hard to accept. For example, Sean, who had been watching the whole process of how the pig's eyes turned into a skewer of roasted pig's eyes before being presented to him. Hurry up and eat, big brother. It's Uncle's treat today, Vanessa urged expectantly. Abraham. Book House Reading Website. Chapter 1625. Sean glanced at Abraham. Of course. You can have as many roasted pig's eyes as you want. Uncle will treat you, Abraham said with a smile. He glanced at the roasted pig's eyes on the plate. The aroma of the roasted meat was already wafting into his nose. The alluring aroma made him restless. Laura, who was at the side, had already closed her eyes in fear. She didn't dare to look at the pig's eyes. Sean retracted his gaze helplessly and looked at the roasted pig's eyes in front of him. The roasted pig's eyes emitted an alluring aroma, but it had a terrifying interior. The disguise was an attempt to make people let down their guard. If they believed in it, they would probably fall into a terrifying abyss. The eyeball wasn't a ball of meat. It was filled with liquid. Even if it was roasted, it wouldn't be able to dry the liquid. The aroma wouldn't be as alluring as the aroma. Hurry up and eat. Hurry up and eat, Vanessa encouraged from the side. It's just a skewer of roasted pig's eyes. The battlefield is much bloodier than this. Sean picked up the roasted pig's eyes with a fearless expression. After a while, the surface didn't seem so hot anymore. He resisted the churning in his stomach, opened his mouth, and bit the first eyeball. He pulled it off the bamboo skewer. The spices mixed with the aroma of the roasted meat began to wreak havoc in his mouth. When the pig's eyes entered his mouth, his teeth came into contact with the slightly tough skin. It was soft, bouncy, and had a strange texture. It was a little strange. However, when he remembered that it was the skin of a pig's eyeball, he suddenly felt a little strange. Isn't it just a skewer of roasted pig's eyes? I'll finish it in a few bites. Sean made up his mind and bit down hard. Pfff, a soft sound rang in Sean's mind. It was the sound of the eyeball exploding. It was as if a boiling volcano had erupted in his mouth. The bag of hot gel wrapped around the eyeball instantly exploded in his mouth. Unlike the skin that had cooled down, the gel seemed to have absorbed an endless amount of heat and then exploded in his mouth. The instant heat made Sean instinctively want to spit it out. However, he quickly realized that the person sitting in front of him was Vanessa. If he opened his mouth now, the lava from the explosion would splash onto Vanessa's face. As the prince and princess of the Roth Empire, they naturally could not allow such an unsightly scene to happen. Therefore, he could only shut his mouth tightly and close his eyes at the same time. He clenched his fists tightly and enjoyed the sour feeling of a volcano erupting in his mouth alone. Is it really that delicious? Vanessa muttered curiously as she looked at Sean, who had already closed his eyes and was immersed in his work. It looks pretty good. After all, it's Mr. Mac's product. I'd believe it even if he turned the pigtail into a delicacy. Abraham nodded in agreement and prepared to order one for himself. Sean raised his eyebrows as he listened to their conversation. He felt as if all the taste buds in his mouth had been killed. This pig's eye was the devil. He even suspected that the boss was an assassin who had deliberately planted such a trap in the pig's eye in an attempt to assassinate him. Who would have thought that such a scorching and terrifying liquid would be hidden in the pig's eye? Sean closed his eyes and endured this terrifying temperature alone. He felt like killing someone. However, after the initial scorching heat, the gel's temperature gradually dropped, and Wei Lei, who had been deeply injured, began to regain his senses. The delicious taste of the exploding liquid slowly filled his mouth. It was a delightful, unpleasant taste. It was as if a mouthful of delicious soup that had been simmering for a long time had been released. It flowed down his throat and into his stomach slowly, and he felt as if his entire body had become joyful. Why does it taste like this? Sean was shocked. The delicious taste soothed his scalded taste buds, and the pain seemed to have been dispelled. The sudden contrast made him a little confused for a moment. However, he had to admit that this eyeball after the explosion did bring him a wonderful taste, and even a pleasant surprise. After the liquid exploded, the eyeball was like a deflated fish bubble. He tried to chew it. The texture was a little tough, but it was soft and juicy. There was also a crispy texture that was like cartilage. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. It didn't have the fishy taste of pork at all, and it left a rich aftertaste. So this is the pig's eye. The texture and taste are so different in different places. It's really amazing. Sean was still savoring the roasted pig's eye with his eyes closed, but his expression had changed. It was blissful, curious, and curious. Sean opened his eyes and looked at the remaining 4 roasted pig's eyes in his hand. He couldn't help but praise, "What a wonderful delicacy. It's really delicious." That's a very high evaluation. Brother, is this roasted pig's eye really that delicious? Vanessa looked at Sean in surprise. She had wanted to prank him with Mr. Mac's new dish, but now it seemed that her plan hadn't worked. Instead, he was the first one to taste the delicious new dish. If you can give such an evaluation, this roasted pig's eye is really worth a try. Abraham was deep in thought as he prepared to order. The customers at the surrounding tables were also looking at them. This roasted pig's eye seemed to be really good for the first time. Many people who were frightened by the pig's eye hesitated to try it themselves. Apart from the fact that you can't bite it open in a hurry, this roasted pig's eye is really amazing. Of course, the process of biting open the eyeball is also very addictive. Sean nodded. He looked at the remaining 4 pig's eyes in his hand and hesitated for a while. In the end, he didn't rush to bite the second one. About 3 minutes later, Amy, who was sitting behind the counter, couldn't resist the temptation of the roasted pig's eye. She opened her small mouth and bit into a pig's eye. The thick eyeball ran around in her mouth mischievously, but it was quickly forced to the edge of her teeth. Her sharp little teeth cut open the thin wall of the eyeball, and the warm liquid exploded in her mouth. Oh, Amy's eyes lit up. The delicious taste bloomed in her mouth, and her expression couldn't help but become blissful. The broth slowly slid into her mouth, and then she started to chew on the remaining eyeball. The roasted skin was fragrant, but the inside was fresh and juicy, and the interlayer was crispy. She chewed on it with light crunching sounds, and it was very interesting. As Amy chewed on the eyeball, she shook it slightly from side to side. She looked intoxicated and focused, and it was obvious that she was completely immersed in the deliciousness of the roasted pig's eye. After a while, she swallowed the pig's eye in her mouth and immediately bit into the second one. The customers nearby could clearly hear the soft sound of the eyeball being bitten open. The sound that made one's scalp tingle was like a trigger, and it made Amy fall into a happy and blissful state of chewing again. I think little boss is tempting me to commit a crime. I can't take it anymore. I don't feel guilty at all when I see little boss eating the roasted pig's eye. It's against the rules to be good looking. Chapter 1626. Amy's taste testing had successfully stirred up a group of customers who usually had strong tastes to try something new. Instantly, many customers began to add more dishes, ordering 1 or 2 skewers of roasted pig's eyes. Oh my goodness, little boss is really a godlike salesman. Even the roasted pig's eyes are so delicious. I can't stand it. George looked at Amy with glowing eyes. Isn't your Chris quite obedient too? Harrison pursed his lips, feeling a little jealous. Hee, that little fellow still doesn't know how to eat other things. But she's still super cute. Just looking at her makes my mood soar. George chuckled, not hiding his smugness. You can just be a show-off. Anyway, those 3 kids of yours are completely out of favor now. Boys should be more independent. Of course, daughters should be doted on, George said nonchalantly. Here are your 10 skewers of roasted pig's eyes and rum. Barbara waved her hand, and a plate of roasted pig's eyes and a glass of rum appeared in front of Harrison. Her voice reached Harrison's ears almost at the same time. Thank you, Harrison said as he looked at the kitchen. Harrison said as he looked in the direction of the kitchen. He was already very familiar with this method of serving food without seeing anyone. How impressive was it to have a spatial magic caster serve food for him? Although I can still vaguely make out the shape of the eyeballs, this aroma is really amazing. It's still a little different from roasted meat, but it's just as tempting. George looked at Harrison's roasted pig's eyes, and his hand had already reached out as he said, "Let me try 1 skewer for you first. I'll return it to you when mine is served later. Don't even think about it. This is the dinner of a lonely traveler without a wife or daughter. I won't allow anyone else to share it." Harrison grabbed the plate first and pulled it in front of him. He picked up a skewer of roasted pig's eyes with a smug expression, and sniffed it carefully with an intoxicated look on his face. "This smell can really heal all injuries," Harrison complimented before biting off a pig's eye. The pig's eye was like a bulging fish bubble in his mouth. It was so tough that he couldn't bite it open immediately. Sigh, it's still a little cheeky. Harrison raised his eyebrows. He used his tongue and mouth to finally fix the eyeball in place, and then bit it open. Ow! The moment he bit down, the boiling liquid burst out of his eyeball. The heat made Harrison's fat jiggle, and he opened his mouth almost out of reflex. The liquid that burst out of his eyeball splattered all over George's face. Fuck! You fucking shot my fucking face. George also jumped up on the spot, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he wiped his face. I. Harrison was so scalded that he couldn't speak. He felt as if a volcano had erupted in his mouth. Instantly, he felt unwell. However, when he opened his mouth, the temperature in his mouth quickly dropped, and his taste buds gradually regained their senses. They began to notice the fresh taste, and the heat and pain were gradually replaced by pleasure. Harrison's eyes gradually lit up, and he closed his mouth. This taste. Harrison frowned and pondered. This taste was so different. It didn't taste like bone broth, nor like meat broth. It was slightly sticky and gelatinous, and scattered in the mouth. It was like a little bitch starting to tease the taste buds that were deeply hurt by it just now. What was hard to accept was that the taste buds fell for her tricks so easily, and even got tricked into bed by her. Harrison sucked on that delicious juice greedily, and started to try chewing the remaining parts of the exploded eyeball. Crunch, crunch. The eyeball made a sound like bones being chewed. The chewy texture brought about a very interesting and wonderful chewing experience, and the occasional surprise from the eyeball made the chewing even more interesting. George thought that Harrison had stepped on a landmine at first, but he didn't expect him to fall into a state of excitement after letting out a bark. Judging from his perverted expression, he seemed to be very satisfied and addicted to it. This roasted pig's eyes is like a combination of a devil and an angel. First, it erupts in your mouth like a volcano, and then it extinguishes the fire very quickly. Then, it blossoms with extreme deliciousness, making you willingly kneel before it, Harrison said with admiration. Is it really that good? George was doubtful. Try it if you don't believe me. Harrison took a skewer of roasted pig's eyes and handed it over. However, before he let go, he said seriously, "But you can't eat it in front of me. This is really scary, but I want to try it at the same time." George took the roasted pig's eyes. He hesitated for a while, but still opened his mouth and took a bite. The resilient eyeball rubbed against his teeth. George was a little scared when he thought about how Harrison let out a pig's bark when he was scalded. However, after hearing Harrison's comments and watching Little Boss's live stream, he couldn't help but feel tempted again. He wouldn't give up until he tried it himself. The more scared he was, the more he thought about it. His eyebrows were knitted together. Finally, the eyeball still exploded in his anxiety and anticipation. The scorching liquid exploded in his mouth. However, after learning from Harrison's experience, George didn't rush to open his mouth this time. Instead, he waited for the crazy eruption to end before opening his mouth wide and taking a few deep breaths to let the heat in his mouth dissipate as much as possible. Tears were already glistening in his eyes. If it weren't for the fact that he wanted to preserve the delicious liquid as much as possible, he would have spat out the boiling pig's eyes immediately. However, just as Harrison said, after the heat subsided, the deliciousness began to appear and wreaked havoc in his mouth without restraint. George also fell into a delicious cycle where the more he chewed, the more fragrant and delicious it became. This roasted pig's eyes are really amazing. It's delicious and painful, but it's irresistible. Yeah, Mr. Mac is too ruthless. Isn't this torture? Harrison and George said with tears in their eyes as they ate the roasted pig's eyes. The behavior of these two brothers also attracted the attention of the surrounding customers. They couldn't help but wonder if they should jump into this trap. I say, fat uncles, why can't you wait for the pig's eyes to cool down before eating? Amy asked the two of them with a strange expression as she bit the pig's eyes. Her little face was filled with a blissful smile, and she wasn't bothered by the scorching liquid at all. Harrison and George looked at each other in shock. They were actually speechless. At the side, the customers who had just taken a bite of the roasted pig's eyes either grimaced in pain from the scalding liquid or blasted the faces of the customers sitting opposite them. The customers were all blushing. This is called "a hasty man never eats the roasted pig's eyes." Amy walked slowly to the kitchen door. She looked at Meg and said, "Father, can I have 2 more skewers? I'm super good at eating." Author's House. Chapter 1627. Sean's half-eaten roasted pig's eyes ended up in Abraham's mouth. "My roasted pig's eyes are here. Do you want to try them?" Abraham had 5 skewers of roasted pig's eyes in front of him. He looked at Vanessa with a smile and said, "When we return to Rodu, we won't be able to eat such wild delicacies anymore." "I don't want them." Vanessa shook her head, but her throat moved subconsciously. Although she felt goosebumps at the thought of those skewers of pig's eyes, her body was very honestly tempted by the aroma. "Big brother, can I not go back? Please, I don't want to go home. I want to continue staying with Uncle." Vanessa shifted her gaze away from the roasted pig's eyes, and looked at Sean pitifully. Look at him. He's so lonely. If he eats too much and falls sick one day, how pitiful would it be for him to be alone in a foreign land? No, no, no. I'm not lonely at all. Food is my best playmate. Chaos City is my heaven, and Mamie's is my second home. I'm not pitiful at all. Abraham shook his head as he took a bite of the pig's eye, and closed his eyes blissfully. "I've eaten the roasted pig's eyes. This time, it's your turn to fulfill your promise," Sean said sincerely as he looked into Vanessa's eyes. "All right, I'm just kidding." Vanessa shrugged and sighed. "Here, I can't bring this back to Rhoda for you." Abraham picked up a skewer of roasted pig's eyes and passed it to her. "Is it really delicious?" Vanessa was still a little doubtful. "Of course. Once you try it, I believe you won't be able to reject it." Abraham nodded with certainty, and took another pig's eye into his mouth. He used his slightly exaggerated expression to express his absolute respect for this eyeball. Young mistress, if you don't like it, you'd better not eat it. Laura persuaded softly. She knew the princess's tolerance limit very well. Such terrifying food was already beyond what she could accept. Indeed, there's no need for that. Sean nodded as well. Although the roasted pig's eyes gave him quite a pleasant surprise, he didn't have the desire to eat another skewer of pig's eyes. No, if I don't try it myself, it will be one of my biggest regrets. Vanessa's gaze suddenly became determined. She took a deep breath and took the skewer of roasted pig's eyes from Abraham's hands. She closed her eyes and bit into one of the skewers. After the experience of Sean and Abraham being scalded, Vanessa was extra careful this time. The flexible pig's eye was like a mischievous elf as it darted left and right in his mouth. His teeth gently rubbed against the surface of the eye, as if he was afraid that he would accidentally break it. However, he was also filled with anticipation towards the thing inside the eyeball. This process was undoubtedly very torturous. The faint anticipation and fear had even surpassed the pig's eye itself. Finally, the pig's eye that had been mischievous in her mouth for a long time was caught off guard by her bite. At the moment when the liquid exploded, the warm liquid finally blossomed. This was the true meaning of life. Vanessa felt as if a rainbow had appeared in front of her tightly shut eyes. It was a beautiful taste that made her feel radiant. After the liquid exploded, the wonderful texture of chewing on the eyeball quickly made her forget about the fact that it was a terrifying pig's eye. She even had a strange thought, so what if it's an eyeball? As long as it's delicious. This roasted pig's eye is too good. It's crazy and addictive. Vanessa opened her eyes in surprise. She looked at the roasted pig's eye in her hand as if she had found a treasure. Right? It's super good. Abraham chuckled. He knew Vanessa's taste very well. How could she resist such a delicacy? But miss, this is a pig's eye. Laura looked at Vanessa in confusion. Since when did the princess, who was even afraid of pigs, dare to chew on a pig's eye and even praise it as delicious? No, this is not a pig's eye. Vanessa shook her head. With a serious expression, she said, "This is a roasted pig's eye made by Mr. Mac. Ever since it was put on the grill, it was no longer an ordinary pig's eye. It was a pig's eye that was blessed by the god of cookery. The beautiful rainbow is its protective color. It's irresistible." Ha! Laura was still a little confused. Anyway, it's delicious. Vanessa took another bite of the roasted pig's eye, and added, "Give me 5 more skewers." No, 10 skewers of roasted pig's eye. 10 skewers. Yes, 10 skewers. Vanessa nodded with certainty. When we return to Rodu, we won't be able to eat such delicious food anymore. This. Sean looked at Vanessa, who was happily chewing on the roasted pig's eye, and didn't know what to say for a moment. He could only silently pick up a piece of fish and put it into his mouth. Fuck. It's insanely spicy again. Sean's face turned red instantly, but he couldn't do anything too exaggerated. He could only grit his teeth and hold it in. Vanessa and Abraham had a hearty dinner, while Sean walked out of Amy's, speechless. Go back and get ready. I'll come and fetch you tomorrow morning. Sean helped Vanessa into the carriage. Before he lowered the curtain, he looked at her and said gently, "Father and Mother really miss you." Actually, I miss them too. Don't worry, I'll go home with big brother Sean tomorrow. Vanessa nodded obediently. Okay. Sean nodded. He lowered the curtain and watched the carriage disappear into the distance. Then, he got into another black carriage and coldly instructed, "Let's go back. Invite me to the Magic Caster Conference." Hee hee, I'm not interested. Crassus played with the fireball in his hand, and waved his hand disinterestedly. Master. Crassus, you've always been the one to open the Magic Caster Conference in the past. You're the one who initiated the Magic Caster Conference, and also an important promoter of the development of magic. If you don't attend the Magic Caster Conference, many young magic casters who embarked on the path of magic because of your influence will be very disappointed, Brent said awkwardly. An awkward expression appeared on Brent's face as he stood at the door. They were going back to Rhoda the next day, so they had no choice but to come to Crassus today. If they couldn't get his approval, they would all be punished when they returned. Yes, Master Crassus. This time, we're not only inviting you, we're also inviting your precious disciple to attend the Magic Caster Conference. She'll be the youngest registered magic caster. Elliot nodded at the side. You want Amy to attend the Magic Caster Conference and compete for the qualifiers? Crassus turned to look at Elliot, and his eyes narrowed slightly. That's right. Your disciple is still young. We can let her join the infant group, Elliot quickly corrected himself. Crassus shook his head, and said, no need. The infant group is just a friendly competition. It's not challenging at all. Let her participate in the official qualifiers for the younger generation of magic casters. But wouldn't that be too unfair to her? Elliot asked worriedly. I'm the one who set this stupid rule, and this disciple is also mine. Do you understand or do I understand? Boss, you have the final say. Elliot immediately gave in. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1628. After leaving the Grey Temple, Irina looked at Meg's back view, and asked, what do you think about that mural of the giant dragons? It proves that our previous inference is correct. The Great Old Ones really exist, and they do have the ability to bewitch people and make the whole world go crazy. Meg stopped in his tracks, and looked at Irina. Moreover, they once worked together to seal the Great Old Ones back then. This means that those fellows are not invincible. Before they completely remove the seal and escape, as long as the whole Norland continent cooperates, we might be able to find a way to seal them again. Irina was silent for a while, and said, since the giant dragons already know about the existence of the Great Old Ones, they will definitely stand on our side during the peace talks. I don't think so. It's still unknown whether the giant dragon race will stand on our side because of a mural. As an extremely conceited race, they will always think that the giant dragon race is the strongest existence. It won't be easy for them to believe and admit that there are existences that are stronger than them in this world, and that can even kill them like mosquitoes. Meg shook his head. He wasn't too optimistic, but he still smiled, and said, however, this will be a big piece of evidence for us. Together with the evidence and information we have now, we might be able to convince more people that the Great Old Ones really exist in this world. What about Sean? Are we just going to let him go without doing anything? Irina asked. What do you want to do? Meg asked with a smile. Forget it. Since we can't kill him, there's no point. Irina thought for a while, and shook her head. I'm afraid I won't be able to resist killing him if I see him. The renovation of the brightly lit hot pot restaurant had been completed. Raina, who had just gotten off work from Amy's, was now standing in front of a group of elves and lecturing them. I'll be in control of the hot pot's base during the early stages. However, in terms of the ingredients, serving, and service, you still need to strictly follow the restaurant's procedures. Our hot pot restaurant will be open for business in 3 days. There's not much time left for us to practice, but we must do our best before the opening. Raina looked at the 50 or so elves before her with a serious expression, and said, everyone has been working very hard these past few days, and we're already able to maintain the intensity of a meal for 1,000 people. However, this is still not enough, because if an accident were to occur at this level, everything would be thrown into chaos. All of the elves listened intently without showing any signs of impatience. All of you are the most outstanding elves chosen by the Night Elves. I know that your abilities and limits are far from enough. Moreover, you will start to rotate in batches in 3 months. I think that before you leave, you will all become top-notch chefs. Raina smiled, and said to the elves, I hope we can make Mana Hot Pot Restaurant the second best hot pot restaurant in Chaos City in the next 3 months. All of the elves also smiled. Raina continued, alright, we will practice for another 3 hours today. Expand the coverage area for everyone, simplify the steps of serving, and clarify the serving route and sequence. Princess, can't you sleep? Laura, who was lying in the outer room, heard the sound of tossing and turning in bed. She got out of bed, lit an oil lamp, put on her clothes, and walked to the bed to ask softly. Vanessa turned around, and her eyes sparkled under the light. She sat up from the bed immediately, and said to Laura, Laura, let's run away again. Huh? Laura was stunned. She quickly shook her head, and said, no, Princess. We can't run away again. If His Highness catches us, I'll definitely be beaten to death. Don't be afraid. I'm here. I'll protect you. Vanessa pulled Laura to the bed, and softly said, I don't want to go home at all. I haven't had enough fun yet. Those fellows in Rodu are not interesting at all. It's more fun outside. Laura looked at Vanessa, and her heart softened. She knew better than anyone what the princess had been through all these years. Those nobles and young mistresses were all sucking up to the princess on the surface, but none of them really treated her as a friend in private. They even said some nasty things to her. Hence, the princess didn't like gatherings, didn't like Rodu, and didn't like those young mistresses from noble families. The past few months in Chaos City were probably the happiest days for the princess. She had never smiled so happily every day like she did during this period of time. She made some humble but honest friends, and even had her teeth healed. Laura looked at Vanessa, and asked, but Your Highness, your teeth are already healed. You're the most beautiful woman in Rhoda now. Don't you want those fellows who used to talk bad about you and laugh at you behind your back to take a good look at you now, and then let them cry at home? Ha! Vanessa faltered. After pondering for a while, she looked at Laura, and confirmed, am I really the most beautiful woman in Rhoda now? There's no woman more beautiful than you. Laura nodded seriously with a smile on her face. She didn't know where the princess had picked up this dialect from. In that case, there really is one more reason to go back. Vanessa rested her chin on her hand, and the corners of her lips began to curl upward. She was already looking forward to the next royal banquet, where she would wear a gorgeous dress and look down on those little bitches with their jaws dropped. All right. Since father and mother both miss me, I'll go back. Vanessa nodded. Laura heaved a sigh of relief. She still didn't know what kind of punishment she would receive when she returned to the palace. After all, she had left the palace with the princess without reporting it, and that was already a crime worthy of death 100 times. Let's go back and stay for a while. After that, we'll run out again and come back to Chaos City, Vanessa continued. You're still running away. Of course. Mamis is the source of my happiness every day. Of course, we're still going to come back. Vanessa nodded with certainty. In a conference hall, Sean, 2 generals, and 2 great magic casters were gathered together. Your Highness, Alex and Irina haven't appeared in the past 2 days. Could they be plotting something? One of the generals asked Sean with a worried expression. Yes. Those 2 are so arrogant. They didn't even try to restrain themselves in Rodu, but they're so quiet in Chaos City. I'm afraid there's something fishy going on. Brent nodded as he rubbed his fat belly. Everyone chimed in one after another, and the atmosphere in the conference hall became a little tense. Even though they had 2 10th-tier knights and 2 10th-tier magic casters, they were up against 2 super demon kings, Alex and Irina. Even though they had a numerical advantage, they didn't have the slightest bit of confidence in being able to defeat them. They have indeed changed. If they were still Alex and Irina, I would have met them before I even reached Chaos City, Sean said with a grave expression. This situation made him even more worried. Chapter 1630. Isn't it just drawing a picture? Although the client's requirements are a bit high, at least they didn't ask for a square circle. Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at Hannah in his arms. He still carried her upstairs and put her on her bed in the study, covering her with a blanket. There was floor heating in the room, so the temperature was just right. It was a good place to sleep. Let's hope this machine is reliable. Meg went downstairs, took the stack of drawings, and went to the blacksmith shop next door. Meg asked Malbai to make the brewing machine. Malbai knew many excellent dwarven blacksmiths. After confirming that there were no problems with the drawings, he agreed to Meg's business. In addition to the agreed amount of money, he also asked for 3 servings of Yangzhou fried rice a day, the kind that would be delivered directly to the door. Once the project started, it would be very busy. There would be no time to wait in line for 1 or 2 hours in front of Mamie's. So Meg agreed to this request without hesitation. He would let Hannah be in charge of delivering the food. She had nothing to do recently anyway. Mr. Mac, don't be in such a hurry to leave. Let me show you something. Malbai stopped Meg, who was about to leave, and led him to the empty room next door. In the empty room, there were some metal pieces and tools scattered on the floor. In the middle of the room, there was an object that was about the height of a person and covered by a black cloth. What is this? Meg was a bit confused. Malbai went forward, and pulled off the black cloth forcefully. An awe-inspiring cannon appeared in Meg's vision. This is my latest improved automatic firing cannon. After changing the ignition method, the firing efficiency has been greatly improved. Moreover, the firing range and hit rate have also increased by a lot. Now, it can accurately hit a fixed target 500 meters away. The radius of destruction is 100 meters, and the furthest it can go is 800 meters, Malbai said excitedly. Meg's eyes lit up. He walked around the cannon and nodded in praise. That's a huge improvement. It's all thanks to Mr. Mac's advice. Malbai scratched his head in embarrassment. If it wasn't for Mr. Mac's advice, he wouldn't have known how to improve it. All I did was share some of my thoughts. It's all thanks to you that you were able to complete it to this extent. Meg said with a smile. He was indeed surprised by Malbai's hands-on ability and talent in making cannons. It's just that this kind of power isn't even comparable to a level 3 magician's fireball spell. Malbai sighed softly, but a confident smile soon appeared on his face. But I've recently discussed with a few fire mages. If we add some active fire element materials into the explosives, it might be able to increase the power of the explosives. It's just that we haven't decided on how to implement it yet. That's a good direction. Meg nodded in agreement. He didn't know much about explosives in his previous life, and didn't know how to make powerful explosives. After all, this was a world with magic. Adding agitated magic element materials was indeed a good way to increase the power of the explosives. Meg was about to return to the restaurant after coming out from Malbai's blacksmith shop. However, he saw that the sun was just right, so he changed his direction and walked towards the park. Aiden Square had the biggest park in Chaos City. It hadn't snowed for a while, so the snow had almost melted. There were only some ice shards left in the dark corners where the sun couldn't reach. The children were playing in the park, while the adults found empty seats to sit and chat with each other. The bright sunshine dispelled the chill of winter, making one's mood seem relaxed and cheerful. You said you have kidney deficiency. Don't look for those charlatans. Let me tell you a good place. Go to Mamie's and order Buddha jumps over the wall. It's a nourishing and holy dish that cures kidney deficiency. It doesn't contain any sugar. One serving is more effective than taking medicine for half a year. I guarantee that your wife will be obedient to you. You said your memory isn't very good recently. Then go to Mamie's too. Eat more steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers. I guarantee that your brain will be sharper than your grandson's. You won't have a headache tutoring homework in the future. You said your skin is dry and you have pimples, your face is yellow and wrinkled, and your husband is not at home. Hurry up and arrange for Mamie's tofu pudding. Eat a bowl every day, and in less than a month, your husband will be a groom every day. What kind of place is Mamie's? A pharmacy. You don't know. This is the best restaurant in Chaos City. However, if you want to say that it's a pharmacy, it's not completely wrong. After all, there are so many difficult and complicated diseases that even doctors and magic casters can't do anything about, but they can be cured after having a meal at Mamie's. There's no injection or medicine, and delicious food is a form of enjoyment. Where else can we find such a good thing? Meg walked past a group of chatting uncles and aunties in the park with a blush on his face. He didn't think that there would be such a rumor going around. Wasn't he the best chef in the world? Why did he feel like he was a quack doctor? However, hearing that so many people had obtained a pleasant surprise while reaping delicious food at Mamie's gave him a sense of achievement. Meg didn't want to be a doctor as that would be disrespectful to his profession, but he didn't mind continuing to do what he was doing. He wanted more customers to benefit and perhaps even change their lives, so that was also a great encouragement to him. After strolling around the park, Meg went to the ice cream shop. Even though the weather was very cold, that didn't stop the enthusiasm of the children and young people. The ice cream shop was still doing very well, and Mia and the others were all very busy. After finishing their work here, they still had to go to the restaurant to continue preparing for lunch. Isn't ice cream just ice cubes? Why do so many people like to eat it? And why do they like it in such cold weather? Angela stood beside the ice cream machine, and looked on with a perplexed expression as Mia handed one ice cream after another to the customers. In such cold weather, it wouldn't be difficult for even a normal person to obtain ice cubes. As for the different colors of the different ice creams, that was most likely due to the addition of some kind of color-matching substance. Angela, do you want to try an ice cream? You haven't tried one yet, right? Mia handed the last ice cream to a young girl, and turned to look at Angela with a smile. Angela actually wasn't very interested in ice cream. In such cold weather, even if she stayed indoors, she still didn't want to eat something cold. This ice cream is super delicious, I'll treat you. Which flavor do you want? Yabamiya asked with a smile. Angela looked at Yabamiya, and hesitated for a moment before saying, I'll have a strawberry one. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1631. 5 minutes later. Angela stuck out her pink tongue and licked the ice cream at the corner of her mouth. She was a little embarrassed, but she looked at Mia expectantly, and asked, Big Sister Mia, how much is this ice cream? Can I buy one? She realized that she was completely wrong. The ice cream was not an ice cube at all, but an exceptionally delicious dessert. It melted in the mouth, and did not have the hardness and bone-chilling coldness of ice cubes. The rich strawberry fragrance and sweetness made one indulge in it. It was a delicacy that made one unable to extricate themselves from. Mia smiled and said, the ice cream is 200 copper coins each. According to boss's rules, employees can enjoy a 10% discount, which is 20 copper coins each. A 10% discount. Angela's eyes lit up. She didn't expect there to be such benefits as an employee of Mamie's. She pondered seriously for a while, and said, then can I have a strawberry ice cream and a blueberry ice cream? Mia quickly passed a blueberry ice cream to Angela, and reminded her, of course. But boss said that you can only have 3 ice creams at a time, so after these 2 ice creams, you can't have any more ice creams today. Angela nodded, but she was soon immersed in the delicious blueberry ice cream. This fruit that she had never heard of also brought a very wonderful eating experience. Speaking of which, Mr. Mac is indeed more talented than the crayfish restaurant's boss. Even a dessert can be so delicious, and he knows how to cook all kinds of delicious food, not just crayfish, Angela thought to herself as she licked the ice cream. However, since he is boss's disciple, why doesn't boss care about him at all? Angela thought to herself, feeling strange. After all, the crayfish restaurant had disappeared mysteriously, and only a pile of gravel was left behind. The crayfish restaurant's boss and his family of 3 had disappeared mysteriously. Of course, she was most curious about Jane, who was helping at the side. This demon maiden with golden horns on her head was her colleague at the crayfish restaurant on Carapace Island. Why would she appear in Chaos City, which was thousands of miles away, and in this restaurant? Since yesterday, she hadn't found a chance to be alone with Jane, so she hadn't asked the question in her heart. After she left, Jane should still be in the crayfish restaurant. Perhaps she would know where the crayfish restaurant owner's family of 3 went. If she asks, how should I answer? Boss said that it's best not to mention what happened on Carapace Island and expose his identity. What should I say? Jane thought worriedly in her heart. She was the worst at lying. She didn't know what to say or how to cover up her lie. Doesn't Big Sister Camilla come to the ice cream shop usually? Angela looked at Mia and asked softly. That's right. Sister Camilla will only appear in the restaurant before the opening hours. She and Phyllis will be in charge of the cutting work. They have to cut and mix all the ingredients needed during the opening hours. It's a huge workload. Mia nodded and said with a smile, but she doesn't seem to want others to know that she works in the restaurant, so she leaves after every meal and never appears during business hours. So that's how it is. Angela nodded thoughtfully. As a demon, of course she knew who Camilla was. She was the princess of the vampire race, the famous Black Widow Countess Bartoli. Angela was indeed shocked when she first found out that she was in charge of the cutting work at Mamie's with her status and identity. After all, the ancestor of the vampire race changed a few months ago. The vampire Dracula became the new ancestor, and that was Camilla's biological uncle. As a ruthless character who caused the death of her husband on their wedding night, Angela felt a trace of a similar aura from her. All these years, she hadn't remarried. While it was touching, it also made Angela a little suspicious. After all, she didn't look like a vampire who would stay a widow for the rest of her life at all. However, with her status and ability, why would she be willing to be a clerk in this restaurant? Was it just to experience life? Or was it related to the boss? It's really an interesting restaurant. Angela licked the ice cream, and the corners of her lips curled up. Perhaps she would be able to find out something interesting here. Let's go. I really can't treat this eye disease, an old doctor said resolutely as he sent Lucy and her brother out. Doctor, I beg you. Please take a look at my brother. He's only 10 years old. Lucy grabbed the doctor's sleeve, and took out a cloth bag with reddened eyes as she said, "We have money. We have medical fees. Please take a look at his eyes." This was already the 5th doctor they had rejected, and it was said that he was the best doctor in Chaos City who could treat eyes. The simple sled, the blind young man, and the skinny young lady quickly attracted the attention of the passers-by. Many people stopped and looked at them with pity. "Young lady, this isn't a matter of money. If it can be treated, I will definitely help." The old doctor shook his head, and sighed as he looked at Darren. "It's just that this eye disease is really strange. I've been a doctor for decades, and have treated more than 10,000 patients with eye diseases, but I've never seen such a strange disease. Using medicine rashly might worsen the condition, so I don't dare to take over. Perhaps other knowledgeable doctors will have a way. Isn't that Dr. Adolphus?" "Yes. The best ophthalmologist in Chaos City. He has brought light and new life to many patients." "Then, why doesn't he want to treat this young man's eyes? Who knows? Maybe it's a very tricky situation. If even Dr. Adolphus can't do anything, I think it's impossible. So pitiful. He can't see at such a young age. What is he going to do in the future?" The onlookers discussed softly with some sighs. Lucy's tears could no longer be stopped as she watched the doctor and the onlookers helplessly. She had dragged Darren all the way to Chaos City, and found the best doctor with the money that the villagers had pooled together, but they still couldn't make Darren see again. Was there really no way to treat his eyes? "It's all right, big sister. Let's go home. I'm fine." Darren reached out, and felt around in the air as a pale smile appeared on his tender face. Lucy wiped her tears away, and grabbed Darren's hand as she resolutely said, "No, Darren. I will definitely cure your eyes. I will let you see this world again." The onlookers' voices became softer as they looked at the pair of siblings with pity. They should have walked a long way. The little girl's straw shoes were already worn out, and her little feet were red from the cold. There were also 2 deep scratches on her shoulders from the old and tattered animal skin coat. She was so young, but she had to shoulder so many things. It was heart-wrenching. "Little girl, let me bring you to a place. Perhaps it can cure your little brother's eye disease." An old man walked out from the crowd. He put the account book under his armpit, and reached his hand out to Lucy. "I am Christopher, the accountant of Albert's jewelry shop. No pop-up window." Chapter 1632. "Do you really know a place that can cure Darren's eyes?" Lucy looked at this kind-looking old man hesitantly. Ever since she came to Chaos City, she had already been recommended 4 or 5 times, but none of the doctors could cure Darren's eyes. "Yes. You might not believe it, but just yesterday, my eyes were no longer able to read what was written in the account book normally. But today, I can see the birds singing in the trees in the distance. It's all so unbelievable," Christopher said with a smile. He even had a look of disbelief on his face. "Little girl, you don't have to worry that this old gentleman is lying to you. Albert's jewelry shop is the biggest jewelry shop in Chaos City, and Mr. Christopher is a very friendly and helpful gentleman. He might really be able to help you," a well-dressed lady at the side said to Lucy with a smile. "Long time no see, Madam Catherine." Christopher looked at the lady and nodded slightly in greeting. She was a regular customer of the gold shop, and he often saw her when he was on duty. Lucy's eyes lit up again when she heard that. She looked at Christopher and said, "If it's possible, please bring us to that place." Although she had failed many times, she still felt warmth in Chaos City. Everyone was trying to help them passionately. However, Darren's eyes seemed to be very troublesome. So far, no doctor had said that they could cure him. Christopher looked at the simple sleigh parked at the side, and a hint of heartache flashed across his eyes. He said in a gentle voice, "That place is a little far from here. Leave your sleigh here for now, and take my carriage there." Lucy nodded. She pulled Darren and followed behind Christopher. She kept looking back at her sleigh worriedly. "Little girl, don't worry. I will look after the sleigh for you," Dr. Adolphus said with a smile. "Thank you," Lucy quickly said gratefully. She was finally relieved. "Get on." Christopher helped Darren into the horse-drawn carriage, and only got on after Lucy got on. The four-wheeled carriage was rather spacious. There were seats on 3 sides, and soft animal skin was laid out. However, Lucy and Darren were still standing a little awkwardly. Christopher sat down at the side, and said to the two of them with a smile, "Have a seat." "Why are you standing?" "I can't take all the seats by myself. Our bodies are too dirty." "We can't dirty your seat. We only need to stand." Lucy shook her head and said as she looked at her dirty animal skin clothes that she had fallen a few times on the road. "You child." Christopher sighed in his heart. The little girl was about the same age as his granddaughter, but his granddaughter was studying in Chaos School now, and had a horse-drawn carriage to send her to and from school every day. "It's okay, you can wash it if it's dirty. Hurry up and sit down. It's not safe to stand." "It won't be a joke if you fall," Christopher said as gently as he could. Then Lucy looked around, and pulled Darren to sit on the floor of the carriage. She looked at Christopher with a radiant smile, and said, "We can sit here. It's also very soft and comfortable." The inside of the carriage was carpeted, which was much more resistant to dirt than the animal skin cushions. Christopher looked at the smiling young lady and the silent young man, and fell silent for a moment. He also smiled, and said, "All right, let's set off then." The horse-drawn carriage continued forward, but it stopped for a while when it passed by a clothing shop. Christopher alighted, and came back with 2 sets of clothes and a pair of red leather boots. "Come, children. Change your clothes first. It's so cold today, don't catch a cold." Christopher handed the clothes and shoes to Lucy, and turned to walk out. "I'll wait for you under the carriage. Let me know when you're done changing." Lucy shook her head as she looked at the bright clothes and red shoes, and said, "Mr. Christopher, we have clothes. We're not cold at all. Little girl, you're about the same age as my granddaughter, so just take it as a small gift from Grandpa. After you change your clothes, I'll bring you to see your eyes," Christopher said with a smile as he put down the curtain and alighted from the carriage. "Big sister." Darren turned to look at Lucy and shyly said, "Mr. Christopher is really a good person." "Yeah, just like Grandpa." Lucy nodded. She looked a little sad at the mention of her grandpa. If only Grandpa was still around. Darren also pursed his lips slightly. "It's all right. As long as your eyes can be cured, Grandpa will be very happy in heaven. Let's change our clothes first. Then, we won't have to worry about dirtying Mr. Christopher's carriage." Lucy quickly changed the topic, and took out Darren's clothes for him to change into. It was a dark blue cotton coat, and it was a little too big for Darren. However, he immediately became much more energetic after changing into it. "It's so warm. What comfortable clothes." Darren raised his hand, and a rare smile appeared on his face. Lucy also took off her dirty and tattered beast-skin coat and pants, and put on the soft cotton coat and pants. It was as if she had crawled into a warm bed, and it was so comfortable that she wanted to sleep. Her clothes fit her very well, as if they were tailor-made for her. The coat was a white beast-skin coat, unlike her rough leather coat. It was soft and comfortable, and felt very warm just by touching it. It should be the fur of some magical beast, and it was a terrifying existence that even the best hunter in the village wouldn't dare to provoke. Lucy only reached out to touch the coat, and then folded it neatly, and gently placed it on a chair at the side. Her gaze landed on the pair of red leather boots at the side. What a beautiful pair of shoes. The workmanship was stunning. Red top, black sole, and a layer of soft and comfortable brown fur in the shoes. Even the shoemaker in the village had never made such beautiful shoes. She lowered her head to look at her feet. Her toes, which were red from the cold, were sticking out from the holes in the straw sandals. It looked rather comical. Can I accept such a precious gift? Lucy was a little conflicted. She couldn't take her eyes off the red shoes. Are you done? Christopher's voice sounded from outside the carriage. We can't delay Darren's treatment. Lucy quickly picked up the pair of red shoes, and quickly took off her straw sandals, and put on the new pair of shoes. Oh! It's so warm. Lucy's eyes lit up immediately. She felt as if her frozen feet were placed on a warm oven. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Chapter 1633. The warm feeling on her feet made Lucy want to cry. She had never worn such comfortable shoes before. Sister. Darren tilted his head in confusion. I'm fine, Lucy quickly replied. Then, she reached out to lift the curtain, and said to Mr. Christopher, who was waiting outside the carriage, Sir, we're done changing. Why aren't you wearing a coat? Christopher asked with a frown as he got onto the carriage and looked at the leather coat that Lucy had folded neatly at the side. I'm really grateful that you brought us to see the doctor and gave us new clothes. However, this leather coat is too precious. I can't accept it. Lucy shook her head with a smile, and said, I'm already very warm wearing this. I've never been so warm before. Christopher's heart ached even more when he saw the innocent smile on Lucy's face. He glanced at the pure white leather coat, and hesitated for a while. But, he didn't insist, and nodded. All right, then take a seat. We should set off now. If we're late, we won't be able to get in the queue. Lucy pulled Darren to a chair at the side and sat down awkwardly. She looked at Christopher and curiously asked, Is that a very famous doctor? Very famous. Christopher nodded. After some thought, he said, Perhaps he can also be called a doctor. That's great. Lucy's eyes lit up. That doctor must be very powerful to be able to make the old man trust him so much. Perhaps he could really treat Darren's eyes. The carriage traveled for a while before stopping. Let's go, children. We're here. Christopher got up and lifted the curtain to walk out. Darren, let's go. Lucy held Darren's hand and followed him out of the carriage. 2 long queues appeared in her vision. There were elves, demons, humans, and so on. Are they all here to see a doctor? Lucy was stunned, and found it a little unbelievable. Come, children. Let's go to the back of the queue. Christopher waved at the 2 of them, and walked to the back of the queue. Lucy agreed, and helped Darren out of the carriage. She followed Christopher to the back of the group. But with such a long line, when would it be their turn? Lucy carefully observed the people in the queue. Their eyes were bright, and there were no injuries on their bodies. Apart from the expectant look on their faces, as if they were waiting for a doctor with superb medical skills, most of them did not look like they were sick. Christopher, why did you bring your granddaughter here today? Aren't you going to drink more rum? A white-haired old man chuckled as he looked at Christopher. They were old drinking buddies and knew each other well. He knew that Christopher had a granddaughter around the same age, but he had never met her. Yes. The weather is good today, so I brought them out for a meal. Christopher nodded with a smile. He didn't reveal Lucy and Darren's identities. Lucy nodded at the old man in greeting. Since he was Mr. Christopher's friend, he must be a good person. But wasn't this a doctor's pharmacy? Why did he want Mr. Christopher to drink more wine? Lucy was a little confused. The old man smiled and nodded at Lucy. His gaze landed on Darren, and he couldn't help but exclaim when he saw his white eyes, "What's wrong with this child's eyes?" The old man's words attracted the attention of the people around them. Darren hid behind Lucy fearfully. Although he couldn't see, he could still feel some gazes on him. The young man looked rather delicate and cute, but his eyes seemed to be blind. It was a pity that he couldn't see at such a young age. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Lucy grabbed Darren's hand and comforted him softly. She knew that these people meant no harm. This child suddenly lost his sight recently. "I've looked for all the doctors, but they couldn't do anything about it. That's why I brought him here to Mr. Mac to try," Christopher said directly without hiding anything. He was still unsure if the sudden clarity of his eyes was really due to the rum. If he was wrong, he might harm this child, and hurt the young lady's heart. "This child can't see. Shouldn't you bring him to see a doctor? Why did you bring Mr. Mac here to try?" "I've never heard that Mr. Mac knows how to treat eyes," the old man said with a puzzled expression. "Yeah. I've heard that Mr. Mac knows how to treat hair loss and kidney deficiency, but I've never heard that he knows how to treat eyes." "That's right. Mr. Mac has already become the best hairdresser in Chaos City. But if we're talking about treating eyes, Dr. Adolphus should be more professional, right?" The people around them also chimed in. "We came here from Dr. Adolphus's place just now. He couldn't do anything about it either." Christopher shook his head and said in a low voice, "I brought this child here because my presbyopia, which had been getting worse for the past few years, suddenly disappeared when I woke up this morning. My eyes suddenly became clear, and I felt as if I was 20 years younger. It wasn't difficult for me to read the accounts anymore. I didn't do anything special these few days. I just like to come to Mamie's and have 2 glasses of rum. Tell me, do you think Mr. Mac cured my eyes?" Everyone looked at Christopher when they heard that. His eyes were indeed clear and clean, unlike the usual cloudy eyes of an old man. Instead, they were as clear as a young man's. They couldn't help but feel puzzled. Could Mr. Mac really be able to cure eyes? Or could it be that drinking rum could clear one's eyes? "I thought it was my illusion at first, but this old man's situation is rather similar to mine. My eyes used to be so blind that I couldn't recognize my own family from 5 steps away, and couldn't differentiate between pigs and dogs from 10 steps away. But when I woke up this morning, my eyes suddenly returned to normal, and I can actually see things from 10 steps away." At this moment, a young man in a long robe with a half-opened book in his hand stepped forward and smiled shyly. "Wow, there's a real case. Looks like Mr. Mac is really good at curing eyes." Everyone looked at the young man, and their eyes lit up. One could be said to be an accident. The 2 customers from Mamie's had their eyes cured at the same time overnight. Obviously, it had something to do with Mr. Mac. Christopher's eyes also lit up when he heard that. He said in surprise, "Could it be that rum can really cure eye diseases? I've been eating at Mr. Mac's place these few days, but I think your deduction might not be very accurate because I've never drunk rum before." The young man shook his head. The young man's words were equivalent to directly excluding rum from the equation. "If it's not rum, then what is it?" Christopher frowned. Vivian, who had been listening at the side for a while, stood up and curled her lips. "Isn't this a very simple deduction question? You and him have been eating at Mamie's these few days, but your eyes suddenly healed when you woke up today. So, you just have to think carefully about what you ate at Mamie's last night. Which one has not been eaten before, and which one has been eaten by both of you last night? The answer will be out. Roasted pig's eyes. Roasted pig's eyes." Christopher and the young man blurted out almost at the same time. "No pop-up window." Chapter 1634. It was a surprise, but it also made sense. The roasted pig's eyes that had just been released yesterday was indeed the first dish that the two of them thought of. It was also the dish that had left the deepest impression on them. It's actually the roasted pig's eyes that were just released yesterday. An eye for an eye, that sounds like it. That's a little too casual, isn't it? Eating a skewer of roasted pig's eyes can actually cure one's eyes. There was an uproar among the customers when they heard that. Although many people had personally tried the roasted pig's eyes last night and were mesmerized by the special eating experience, most of the customers still stayed away from it. Although I'm not sure if it's the roasted pig's eyes, the dishes I've been eating these days have been more fixed. The roasted pig's eyes should be added on a whim yesterday, Christopher said after some thought. I've also eaten Yangzhou fried rice for 3 days in a row. I'm not sick of it, but I suddenly wanted to challenge myself yesterday, so I ordered a serving of roasted pig's eyes. The young man smiled a little embarrassedly. If Yangzhou fried rice doesn't have a specific effect, I think it's probably the roasted pig's eyes. So, if you want to know if Mr. Mac can cure this young man's eyes, all you have to do is order a serving of roasted pig's eyes for him, Vivian concluded. She then looked at Christopher and said seriously, children shouldn't drink alcohol. Rum is a highly concentrated alcohol. Drinking it may cause problems. As the direct beneficiary of the spicy grilled fish, Vivian had no doubt that Mr. Mac's food could have a direct effect on certain illnesses. However, the right medicine, the dish, had to be found first. Moreover, she had always thought that this was not a coincidence. It was Mr. Mac's intention. It was said that good medicine was bitter, but Mr. Mac made the medicine so delicious and tempting. He was really a benevolent doctor and the reincarnation of the god of cookery. Yes, I have my concerns too. I wanted to ask Mr. Mac first. After getting confirmation from this young man, I naturally won't let him drink anymore, Christopher said with a nod. Mr. Christopher, isn't this a clinic? Lucy, who was listening in confusion, asked in a low voice. Although she could feel that these people did not have any ill intentions, they did not seem to want to find a doctor to treat Darren. Instead, they wanted him to eat some kind of food here so that Darren's eyes could recover. She was a little puzzled by this. It's like this, young lady. Mamie's is a very famous restaurant. My eyes regained their sight after eating some food here, and the same thing happened to that gentleman's eyes. Since Dr. Adolphus couldn't do anything about it, perhaps Mr. Mac can give it a try. After all, he often does incredible things, Christopher explained as he looked at Lucy. Is it food, not medicine? Lucy frowned. She still found it hard to understand. Could a restaurant owner really cure Darren's eyes? Vivian looked at Lucy and comforted her. Don't worry, Mississippi Mr. Mac is a very good person. The food he makes might really work on your brother's eyes. Many people have already been reborn here. Yes. Lucy looked at the beautiful Vivian, and the trace of uneasiness in her heart gradually calmed down. Since Mr. Christopher brought them here, he must have his reasons. She really didn't know where to bring Darren. Her heart ached every time she saw his disappointed expression. I will confirm with Mr. Mac again later. He made the dish, so he must know it better, Christopher said. Lucy nodded slightly. She had already calmed down. They didn't have to wait for too long before the restaurant's door opened. A handsome chef walked out and welcomed the customers into the restaurant with a smile. Mr. Mac, I have something to ask you. Christopher brought Lucy and Darren to the entrance of the restaurant. He stopped and looked at Meg and said, which of the dishes you make can treat eye diseases? Meg was stunned by this old man's question. This question was a little out of the ordinary, wasn't it? Who would prescribe medicine in a restaurant? He glanced at the young man and young lady standing behind Christopher. The young lady looked to be about 13 or 14 years old. Her skin was yellowish, and she was skinny. Her yellow hair made her look like she had been malnourished for a long time. Her black eyes were looking at him expectantly and timidly. Meanwhile, the young man beside her was only about 10 years old. His complexion looked healthier than hers, but his eyes were deathly white. His little hand was holding the young lady's hand tightly, so he should be blind. Oh, it's like this. I met this pair of siblings on the road just now. This young man can't see, and Dr. Adolphus can't do anything about it, so I brought them here to ask if you have any ideas, Christopher explained. It might be more suitable to find a professional doctor to treat eye diseases. After all, I'm just a chef. Meg retracted his gaze from the young man. The omniscient door had already given him feedback on the young man's condition. Darren, male, human, 10 years old. Suffers from severe toxic cataracts. He can't see anything in his eyes. If this condition continues, he will lose his sight completely. This was obviously an illness that he couldn't treat. After all, he was only doing hairdressing now and improving the quality of his nightlife. This level of illness was indeed not easy to treat. Lucy, who was full of anticipation, was disappointed. As expected, it still wasn't possible. But Mr. Mac, I drank wine and ate roasted pig's eyes at your place yesterday. When I woke up this morning, my presbyopia of more than 10 years was cured. I don't believe you don't know how to treat eye diseases, Christopher said, shaking his head. Yes, Mr. Mac. My severe myopia was cured after eating your roasted pig's eyes. I really have to thank you properly. The young man who spoke earlier also looked at Meg gratefully. Because of his eyes, he had been in a lot of awkward situations all these years. His previous girlfriend broke up with him because he mistakenly held someone else's wife's hand on the street. There's such a thing. Meg looked at the two of them and was stunned again. Roasted pig's eyes could actually treat myopia and presbyopia. Using shape to complement shape. Damn, this is too exaggerated, isn't it? System, come out and explain. Meg frowned. He felt that things weren't that simple. The ingredients for roasted pig's eyes were selected from the fiery wild boar's eyes in the active volcano range of Nikola Tower. In order to adapt to the glaring flames of the volcano, the fiery wild boar's eyes are rich in amino acids that the human body needs, as well as a special element. The system has temporarily named it T-serum. It can effectively treat many eye diseases, and the effect will be even better after being roasted. The system's voice quickly sounded in Meg's mind. Book guest house reading website. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.